Hi everyone. Great to have you here at Dark Harry. Get comfortable because today we're presenting What If Grandmama Addams Replaced Dumbledore as Headmistress. Hogwarts became a nightmare. Before we start, a gentle reminder, if you love stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps the algorithm show our videos to more people. And now, the moment you've been waiting for. Chapter 1. The Witch in Black. The Hogwarts Express whistled sharply as it pulled away from platform 9 3/4, its scarlet engine belching steam into the crisp September air. Eliza Thornfield, Liz to literally everyone except her grandmother, shoved her trunk onto the overhead rack and collapsed into the empty compartment with a dramatic sigh. The summer had dragged on forever, and she was beyond ready to get back to Hogwarts for her 6th year. Did you hear? The compartment door slid open with a bang as Maya Chong burst in, her usually perfectly styled hair disheveled like she'd been running. Dumbledore's gone. Liz sat up straight, nearly knocking her copy of Advanced Rune Translation to the floor. What do you mean, gone? Like on holiday? No, like disappeared. Maya dropped onto the seat opposite Liz, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper despite the empty compartment. My dad works at the Ministry, remember? He said Dumbledore missed some super important International Confederation meeting 3 days ago. When they sent someone to check on him, his office was empty, Phoenix gone, everything. Just, poof. That's impossible, Liz said, though the knot forming in her stomach suggested otherwise. Dumbledore wouldn't just leave, not with everything that's been happening. The wizarding world had been on edge all summer. Strange disappearances, odd weather patterns, and rumors of dark magical activity had filled the Daily Prophet for months. Dumbledore had been the steady presence keeping panic at bay. Well, he did, Maya insisted. And get this, the Ministry's in complete chaos trying to find a replacement before term starts. Which is, today. The compartment door slid open again, this time revealing the Thornhill twins, identical down to their mischievous grins and perpetually untucked shirts. Despite being sorted into Gryffindor, they befriended Liz during their first flying lesson when she'd helped them charm their brooms to buck like broncos, strictly for research purposes, of course. Are we talking about Dumbledore doing a runner? Asked Finn, the twin with a small scar above his left eyebrow. It's not doing a runner if someone made him disappear, his brother Rowan countered, squeezing in next to Maya. Either way, Finn continued, Dad said the Ministry's desperate. They've been reaching out to all sorts of witches and wizards who'd normally never get within spitting distance of a teaching position. The train lurched forward, picking up speed as it left London behind. Rain began to patter against the windows, streaking the glass and blurring the passing countryside. I heard they've already picked someone, Rowan said, leaning forward eagerly. Some ancient witch who's supposedly related to Morgana Le Fay herself. Liz rolled her eyes. Next you'll tell me she brews potions with baby toes and dances naked under the full moon. Wouldn't put it past her, actually, came a drawling voice from the doorway. Felix Blackwood stood there, his Slytherin prefect badge gleaming on his immaculately pressed robes. His dark hair fell across one eye in what Liz considered a deliberately calculated manner. Everything about Felix was calculated, from his perfectly knotted tie to his carefully cultivated air of knowing more than everyone else. Blackwood, Liz acknowledged coolly. Eavesdropping already? Term hasn't even officially started. Hardly eavesdropping when you're practically shouting about baby toes, Thornfield. He stepped into the compartment uninvited and closed the door behind him. But as it happens, I do know who they've appointed as headmistress. 4 pairs of eyes fixed on him with varying degrees of skepticism and interest. Well? Maya prompted when he didn't immediately continue. Felix smirked, clearly enjoying having their attention. Ever heard of the Addams family? Liz frowned. The name rang a distant bell, something from an old history of magic text perhaps. You're joking, Finn breathed, eyes wide. The American witches? Rowan asked simultaneously. The ones who practice, magic so old it predates the international statute of secrecy, Felix finished, looking smugly pleased at their reactions. The family that supposedly invented half the curses in existence and considers a deadly poison a suitable aperitif. Rubbish, Liz declared. The ministry would never allow someone from that family near students. Felix shrugged one elegant shoulder. Desperate times, Thornfield. My father sits on the board of governors. They had exactly 3 candidates willing to take the position on such short notice. One was Gilderoy Lockhart, who's still in St. Mungo's thinking he's a teapot, Maya interjected. Precisely. Another was some ministry bureaucrat with all the magical talent of a flobberworm. And then there was Esmeralda Frump Addams. Grandmama Addams, the twins whispered in unison, their expressions a mixture of horror and delight. The compartment fell silent except for the rhythmic clickety-clack of the train and the rain drumming harder against the windows. Liz tried to recall anything she'd read about the Addams family, but all that came to mind were vague whispers of ancient magic, mysterious disappearances, and spells that bent the very laws of nature. You're making this up, Liz insisted, though with less conviction than before. Felix's smirk widened. Guess we'll find out at the feast, won't we? The rest of the journey passed in a blur of speculation, rumor, and increasingly wild theories about what a Hogwarts run by an Addams might look like. Even the usual excitement of arriving at Hogsmeade Station felt muted beneath the weight of uncertainty. As the thestral-drawn carriages carried them up the winding path to the castle, Liz found herself searching the illuminated windows of Hogwarts, half expecting to see bats circling the towers or smoke billowing from the headmistress's office. But the castle looked the same as always, magnificent, ancient, and welcoming. Until they stepped inside. The entrance hall was dimly lit with flickering torches that cast long, dancing shadows across the stone walls. The usual warm golden glow had been replaced by an eerie blue-green light that reminded Liz of the depths of the Great Lake. And was it her imagination, or were the suits of armor, watching them? One suddenly turned its helmet to follow a first-year who squeaked in terror and nearly tripped over his robes. Definitely not her imagination. Did the armor always do that? Maya whispered, clutching Liz's arm. No, Liz replied, keeping her voice steady despite the chill crawling up her spine. No, they definitely didn't. The great hall doors swung open with a dramatic groan. Inside, thousands of candles still floated beneath the enchanted ceiling, but they now burned with flames in shades of purple, green, and midnight blue. The familiar 4 house tables remained, but the tablecloths had changed from their usual white to black, adorned with silver goblets that looked suspiciously like, were those actual skulls? And at the high table, seated in what had always been Dumbledore's ornate chair, was a figure that caused every student to fall silent mid-conversation. She was ancient, impossibly so, with a face as wrinkled as a dried apple and wild gray hair that stuck out in all directions like she'd been electrocuted. Her black dress looked like it belonged to another century entirely, high-necked and adorned with what appeared to be tiny animal bones. But it was her eyes that truly captured attention, sharp, dark, and glittering with an intelligence that seemed to see right through everyone in the room. Is that? Maya began. Grandmama Addams, Felix confirmed, having appeared at Liz's other side. Charming, isn't she? Professor McGonagall stood rigidly beside the new headmistress, her face a carefully controlled mask that nevertheless couldn't quite hide her displeasure. As the students filed in and took their seats at their house tables, an unnatural hush fell over the hall. Even the ghosts hovered uncertainly at the edges of the room, as if reluctant to fully enter. The sorting ceremony proceeded with an air of surreality. The sorting hat seemed subdued, its song shorter and more cryptic than usual, with vague warnings about ancient powers returning and the old ways reawakening. When it finished, even the first-years looked too stunned to be properly terrified about their sorting. Once the last new student had scurried to their house table, McGonagall cleared her throat and approached the podium. Her voice, when she spoke, was determinedly normal, though Liz detected the faintest quaver. Welcome to another year at Hogwarts. As you may have noticed, Headmaster Dumbledore is currently unavailable. A murmur swept through the hall before McGonagall's stern gaze silenced it. The Ministry of Magic has therefore appointed an interim headmistress. May I introduce Esmeralda from Addams. The ancient witch rose from her chair with surprising agility. She didn't move to the podium but instead raised one gnarled hand. The candles throughout the hall simultaneously flared brighter, their flames shooting up almost to the ceiling before settling back down to an even more subdued glow than before. "Well, well, well," she croaked, her voice like dry leaves scraping across stone. "What a delicious collection of young minds." She smiled, revealing teeth that were surprisingly white and unsettlingly sharp. "I've heard such fascinating things about Hogwarts," Grandmama continued. "So traditional. So safe." The way she pronounced safe made it sound like a disease. "We'll have to do something about that." McGonagall's lips thinned to a nearly invisible line. "Magic isn't safe, children," Grandmama's voice suddenly boomed across the hall without her seeming to raise it. "Magic is wild. Magic is chaos. Magic is life and death and everything in between. You've been taught to control it like a pet mouse, but I'm going to teach you to dance with the dragon." She cackled, a sound that raised goosebumps on Liz's arms despite the warmth of the hall. "Oh yes, there will be changes. The staircases are already much happier now that I've let them play their little games again. The forest creatures are so looking forward to meeting those of you brave enough to venture past the tree line. And wait until you see what I've done with the greenhouses." Professor Sprout made a small choking noise. "But enough chatter. I'm famished." Grandmama clapped her hands twice, and the golden plates filled not with the usual feast but with dishes that had half the students recoiling. What appeared to be entire roasted bats glazed in some glistening purple sauce. Writhing pasta that looked disturbingly alive. Goblets filled with thick, red liquid that was almost certainly not cranberry juice. "Is that moving?" Finn whispered, poking at something gelatinous on a platter near him. "Don't be ridiculous," Liz said, though she eyed her own plate warily. "It's just exotic cuisine." With determined bravery, she served herself what looked like the safest option, something resembling a stew, although she couldn't identify any of the floating chunks. To her surprise, the first cautious spoonful was delicious. Flavors exploded on her tongue, spicy, sweet, and savory all at once, unlike anything she'd tasted before. Around the hall, other students were making similar discoveries. Expressions of disgust gradually transformed into surprise and, in some cases, delight. The Thornhill twins were enthusiastically devouring what looked like scorpion skewers, while even Maya had cautiously begun sampling a dish that occasionally emitted small puffs of purple smoke. "Told you," Felix said, appearing yet again as students began moving between tables in the confusion. He slid onto the bench across from Liz. "The Addams family is famous for their cuisine. Half of it looks like it'll kill you, the other half looks worse, but it's all supposedly incredible." "Since when are you an expert on obscure witch families?" Liz asked, taking another spoonful of the mysteriously delicious stew. "Since my great-grandmother was almost engaged to Gomez Addams before she decided he was too conventional." Felix's lips quirked in amusement at Liz's skeptical expression. "Family history, Thornfield. The Blackwoods and the Addams have crossed paths many times over the centuries. And none of you ended up in St. Mungo's permanent hexing ward? I find that hard to believe." Felix's expression shifted, becoming uncharacteristically serious. "The Addams family isn't what you think. They're not evil, they're just different. They see magic differently. They use magic differently. And that's supposed to be reassuring?" "I didn't say that." Felix glanced toward the high table where Grandmama was now feeding something wriggling from her plate to what appeared to be a small potted plant with teeth. "I just said they're not evil. Dangerous, yes. Unpredictable, absolutely. But not evil." Before Liz could respond, the plates cleared themselves, and Grandmama Addams rose again. The hall fell instantly silent. Such appetites, she cackled. How wonderful to see young witches and wizards embracing new experiences. That will serve you well in the coming year. Her dark eyes swept the room. Now, a few start-of-term notices. First, Mr. Filch has provided me with his list of forbidden items. I've added it to my kindling pile, such restrictions stifle creativity. Filch made a strangled sound from his corner of the hall. The Forbidden Forest is, of course, strictly off-limits, Grandmama continued, to any student who wishes to remain boring and uneducated in the older magics. She winked, causing several professors to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Those with more adventurous spirits might find that the creatures respond quite well to offerings of sweet cakes and the occasional blood sacrifice, of small animals only, of course. McGonagall closed her eyes briefly, as if praying for strength. Finally, I've taken the liberty of making some small adjustments to the castle to make it feel more like home. Nothing major, just a few enhancements to the existing magic. You might notice the portraits are a bit more interactive now. And do watch your step on the staircases, they've developed quite the sense of humor since I removed those tedious restraining charms. A nervous titter ran through the student body. Now off to bed. Classes begin at the crack of dawn. Or possibly midnight. I haven't quite decided yet. With another wild cackle, Grandmama waved a dismissal, and the benches scraped back as stunned students rose to leave. She can't be serious, Maya whispered as they joined the crowd heading for the doors. Oh, I think she's entirely serious, Felix replied. Sleep tight, Thornfield. Try not to get eaten by your bedsheets. With a mock salute, he peeled off toward the dungeons. The journey to Ravenclaw Tower proved Grandmama hadn't been exaggerating about the staircases. No longer content to simply move between landings, they now swiveled unexpectedly while students were mid-climb, tilted at alarming angles, and in one particularly heart-stopping moment, completely inverted, sending a group of second-years dangling from the steps like bats until Professor Flitwick hurried by and righted it with a complicated wand movement and what sounded like a stern lecture to the staircase itself. The Ravenclaw knocker posed its usual riddle to enter the common room, though Liz could have sworn it added, or else, at the end in an ominous tone that was definitely new. Inside, the common room looked mostly unchanged, though the normally serene blue and bronze decor was now punctuated by several large, suspicious-looking plants that hadn't been there before. One snapped at a first-year who wandered too close. Don't worry, Liz told the wide-eyed child. Just, don't make any sudden movements near them. Or slow movements. Maybe just avoid them entirely. Sleep proved elusive that night. Every creak and groan of the castle, normally soothing background noise to Liz, now sounded deliberate and vaguely threatening. When she finally did drift off, her dreams were filled with moving staircases that led to nowhere and a cackling old witch who kept offering her tea in cups with teeth. Liz woke before dawn, stomach growling. The feast had been delicious but strange, and she'd been too nervous to eat much. Deciding a kitchen raid was in order, she slipped out of bed, pulled on her robe, and quietly made her way out of Ravenclaw Tower. The corridors were eerily silent, lit only by the occasional torch that cast long shadows on the walls. Twice she had to double back when staircases refused to cooperate, and once she could have sworn a suit of armor tried to trip her. By the time she reached the painting of the fruit bowl that concealed the entrance to the kitchens, she was thoroughly annoyed and ravenous. Tickling the pear, she watched it transform into a handle and pulled the door open, only to freeze on the threshold. The kitchen was normally a place of organized chaos, with house elves bustling about preparing meals. But the scene before her now was something else entirely. Green smoke billowed from a massive cauldron in the center of the room. Strange herbs hung from the ceiling, and what looked suspiciously like animal bones were arranged in patterns on the floor. And there, stirring the cauldron with a wooden spoon nearly as tall as herself, was Grandmama Addams. Don't just stand there letting the heat out, child, she called without looking up. Come in, come in. Liz's legs moved automatically, carrying her into the kitchen. The door swung shut behind her with a definitive click. I was just looking for a snack, Liz explained, eyeing the bubbling cauldron warily. I didn't mean to interrupt your cooking. Grandmama cackled. Cooking, brewing, enchanting, it's all the same at the fundamental level. Combining elements to create something greater than their parts. She peered at Liz with those unervingly sharp eyes. You're the Thornfield girl. Ravenclaw. Excellent potential, though they've been teaching you all wrong. Liz blinked, surprised to be recognized. Thank you. I think. Not a compliment, just an observation. Grandmama waved the massive spoon, splattering something glowing and green across the floor where it sizzled alarmingly. Hunger at odd hours is the sign of an active mind. Or a tapeworm. Either way, you're just in time to help me test this. Test, what exactly? Breakfast, of course. Grandmama gestured to the cauldron. A little something to wake up the students' minds and other things. That didn't sound ominous at all. Liz took a step back toward the door. I'm not really hungry anymore, nonsense. The old witch moved with startling speed, suddenly beside Liz and steering her toward the cauldron with a bony hand that was surprisingly strong. Just a small taste. If it works correctly, you'll experience perfect mental clarity for exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. If not. She shrugged. Well, the tentacles usually recede within a day or two. Tentacles. But Grandmama had already dipped a ladle into the concoction and was holding it toward Liz's lips. The liquid was no longer green but a shimmering gold that smelled like cinnamon, fresh parchment, and something electric. Every instinct told Liz to run. But something else, curiosity, perhaps, or that Ravenclaw thirst for knowledge, made her hesitate. Perfect mental clarity did sound appealing, especially with NEWT classes starting. Oh, what the hell, she muttered, and took a sip. Flavor exploded across her tongue, sweet, tangy, and buzzing with energy. For a second, nothing happened. Then her vision sharpened dramatically. The kitchen came into focus with crystalline clarity, every detail suddenly vivid and meaningful. Her mind raced, making connections between things she'd never considered before. The pattern of herbs hanging from the ceiling, not random but arranged to amplify magical energy. The bone configurations on the floor, an ancient runic formula for enhancing potency. Whoa, she breathed. Grandmama nodded approvingly. Good. No tentacles, and your eyes aren't glowing. Always a positive sign. Liz barely heard her, too busy marveling at how she could suddenly recall every word of every textbook she'd ever read. This is amazing. Why isn't this potion in our curriculum? Because the ministry, Grandmama spat the word like a curse, decided centuries ago that certain branches of magic were too dangerous for young minds. As if danger isn't the best teacher of all. She stirred the cauldron vigorously. That's what's wrong with magical education today. Too much theory, not enough practical application. In my day, you weren't considered a proper witch until you'd survived at least 3 near-death magical experiences. Is that why the staircases are trying to kill us now? Liz asked, her enhanced mind making the connection. Grandmama cackled delightedly. Sharp as a poisoned dagger. Yes, exactly. The castle has grown complacent over the centuries. Dumbledore, she waved a dismissive hand, for all his power, treated this place like a museum. But Hogwarts was built for greater purposes. It wants to participate in education. By attempting to murder students with moving architecture. By challenging them. By forcing them to remain constantly vigilant. Grandmama's eyes gleamed. Tell me, would you have been able to find your way here if the castle hadn't made it difficult? Well, yes. I've been sneaking to the kitchen since 2nd year. But was it interesting? Did it require skill? Did it make you think? Liz had to admit it hadn't. Tonight's journey had forced her to be creative, to problem solve on the fly. Exactly. Grandmama nodded as if Liz had spoken aloud. Magic isn't meant to be comfortable or predictable. It's wild, adaptive, alive. She gestured around the kitchen. Everything I'm doing is for one purpose, to wake up the magic that's been dormant in this castle and in its students. Despite herself, Liz was fascinated. But isn't it dangerous? Some students could get hurt. Life is dangerous, child. Better to learn that here, where the worst that might happen is temporary tentacles, than out there. Grandmama's expression suddenly darkened. Because there are shadows gathering, and they won't care how many OWLs you earned or whether you can transfigure a teacup into a tortoise. A chill ran down Liz's spine that had nothing to do with the drafty kitchen. You mean? You know who? But he's gone. Grandmama snorted. That upstart? He's merely a symptom of a much older, deeper darkness. She leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. Why do you think Dumbledore left? He knows what's coming. He's preparing, in his own way. And he arranged for me to be here, to prepare you all in mine. Liz's mind, still preternaturally sharp from the potion, raced to process this. Dumbledore planned his own disappearance. And brought you here on purpose? Grandmama tapped her nose with one gnarled finger. Clever girl. Though if you repeat that particular detail, I'll deny it and turn your hair into snakes. Now, she thrust a large flask into Liz's hands, filled with the golden potion. Take this. One small sip before your most difficult class today. And watch out for the third-floor corridor, the carpet has developed a taste for shoelaces. Before Liz could ask any of the 100 questions swirling in her mind, the kitchen door burst open. Professor McGonagall stood there in a tartan dressing gown, her hair in a hairnet, expression thunderous. Esmeralda. We agreed no experimental potions until at least the second week of term. Did we? How terribly restrictive of me. Grandmama didn't look remotely contrite as she continued stirring. Just a little mental clarity brew, Minerva. Nothing to get your hairnet in a twist about. McGonagall's nostrils flared. And I suppose the tentacle incident in 1937 was also nothing to worry about. Tentacles build character. McGonagall turned her stern gaze to Liz. Miss Thornfield, I suggest you return to your dormitory immediately. And if you're experiencing any unusual symptoms, please report to the hospital wing. Liz clutched the flask behind her back. Yes, Professor. I was just getting an early start on her education, Grandmama interrupted cheerfully. Can't fault the girl for initiative. McGonagall's lips thinned dangerously. Go, Miss Thornfield. Now. Liz didn't need to be told twice. She slipped past McGonagall, flask still hidden, and hurried back toward Ravenclaw Tower. Behind her, she could hear the two witches beginning what sounded like an epic argument about the definition of reasonable risk in educational settings. Her mind was still racing with crystal clarity as she navigated the shifting staircases with newfound ease. If what Grandmama had told her was true, if Dumbledore had orchestrated this whole situation, then something truly serious was happening. Something beyond ordinary dark wizards and political machinations. And somehow, she'd just become privy to information that not even McGonagall seemed to know. The question was, what was she going to do about it? Morning arrived with a shock when every window in the castle simultaneously flew open at precisely 6 a.m., accompanied by a chorus of inhuman shrieks that sent students tumbling from their beds in panic. What in Merlin's name was that? Maya gasped, clutching her blanket to her chest as the windows slammed shut again. Liz, who had been awake for hours thanks to the lingering effects of Grandmama's potion, shrugged. Our new wake-up call, apparently. The notice boards in every common room displayed new schedules, written in spidery handwriting that occasionally rearranged itself while students were trying to read it. Classes had been completely reshuffled, with new subjects appearing alongside traditional ones, practical hexing, replacing standard defense against the dark arts, creature communication, instead of care of magical creatures, and most alarmingly, explosive mixtures, where potions should have been. Breakfast was a chaotic affair. The great hall's enchanted ceiling showed not the weather outside but what appeared to be scenes from various students' nightmares from the previous night, giant spiders chasing screaming figures, exams where the questions kept changing, and one particularly vivid image of Professor Snape performing ballet in a pink tutu. "Is that your nightmare?" Finn asked a mortified-looking Hufflepuff boy as the tutu-clad Snape executed a perfect pirouette overhead. The food, at least, was relatively normal, though the pumpkin juice occasionally changed color when you weren't looking directly at it. Professor McGonagall moved through the hall distributing regular class schedules, her expression suggesting she'd aged a decade overnight. "Disregard the creative alternatives posted in your common rooms," she informed the Ravenclaw table stiffly. "Standard curriculum will continue alongside any innovations the headmistress wishes to implement." When Liz received her schedule, she noticed additional sessions penciled in after regular classes, optional enrichment activities with cryptic names like Midnight Harvesting and Elemental Attunement. Their first class of the day was double potions with the Slytherins. As they made their way to the dungeons, Liz debated whether to risk another sip of Grandmama's Clarity Potion. Snape's classes were challenging at the best of times. "You look disgustingly alert this morning," Felix commented, falling into step beside her. "Don't tell me you're actually excited about whatever horrors await us in potions." "Just curious," Liz replied. "Aren't you?" Felix studied her for a moment. "You've seen her again, haven't you?" "Grandmama." Liz hesitated, then nodded slightly. No point denying it when Felix's family apparently had history with the Addams clan. "What did she say to you?" "Nothing important. Just some nonsense about the castle being alive and magic needing to be wilder." Felix's expression became serious again. "Be careful, Thornfield. The Addams don't think like normal witches and wizards. Their definition of educational might include activities that would land anyone else in Azkaban." Before Liz could respond, they reached the potions classroom door, or where the door should have been. Instead, there was what appeared to be a solid stone wall. "What the?" Maya pressed her hands against the stone in confusion. "It wants something," Felix muttered, running his fingers along the wall's surface. "A password?" "No, that's not it." Liz's mind, still unnaturally sharp, noticed a small symbol etched into one stone, a tiny cauldron with what looked like fumes rising from it. Acting on instinct, she pressed her palm against it and whispered, "I seek the knowledge of transformation." The wall shimmered and dissolved, revealing the classroom beyond. But it wasn't the potions classroom they knew. The neat rows of desks had been replaced by individual workstations arranged in a circle. In the center blazed a fire pit, an actual open fire in the middle of the stone floor, over which hung a massive cauldron. The walls were lined with ingredients Liz had never seen before, some still moving in their jars. And instead of Professor Snape's intimidating figure, Grandmama Addams stood by the fire, tossing something that sparkled into the flames. Come in," she cackled as the stunned students hovered uncertainly in the doorway. "Don't be shy. Today we learn the true art of potion making, no books, no measurements, just intuition and the willingness to risk a little spontaneous combustion." Snape appeared from the shadows of the room, his face locked in an expression of such concentrated loathing that several students stepped back instinctively. "Professor Addams has, graciously, offered to co-teach this session," he said, each word clearly causing him physical pain. "I will emphasize that standard potion-making protocols and safety measures remain in effect." "Safety measures," Grandmama scoffed, waving a dismissive hand that sent sparks flying from her fingertips. "In my day, we didn't consider a potion properly brewed unless at least one student grew an extra limb." The class exchanged horrified glances. "One student per station." Grandmama clapped her hands, and the wall solidified behind the last student, sealing them all in. "Today's challenge, brew something unexpected. No recipes, no instructions. Just you, your ingredients, and the ancient whispers of alchemical wisdom." This is insane, Maya whispered as they moved toward the workstations. How are we supposed to brew anything without instructions? That's the point, Liz realized, the clarity potion helping her understand. She wants us to experiment, to feel the magic rather than just follow rules. Feel the magic? That's not how potions work, Maya hissed. That's how explosions work. But Liz was already scanning the ingredients along the wall, her mind making connections between properties and possibilities. She selected several items: valerian root, powdered moonstone, the delicate translucent wing of some unknown insect, and a vial of what appeared to be morning dew but smelled faintly of ozone. At the next station, Felix was doing something similar, his movements confident as he gathered ingredients. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. They were both playing along with this madness, at least for now. Grandmama prowled between the stations, offering cryptic advice: more heat. Magic loves heat, and occasionally tossing additional ingredients into students' cauldrons without warning, just a little nightshade to liven things up. Snape followed in her wake, looking increasingly apoplectic and occasionally vanishing particularly dangerous concoctions with a flick of his wand before they could explode. Liz lost herself in the process, trusting her enhanced intuition. She crushed, mixed, stirred, and heated, adjusting by feel rather than measurement. The potion shifted from clear to deep purple to a shimmering silver that sent up spirals of sweet-smelling steam. Ooh, interesting choice, Grandmama appeared suddenly at her shoulder, peering into the cauldron. Emotional amplification with a clarity base. Bold. Liz started. She hadn't consciously aimed for any specific effect, but looking at her ingredients now, she realized that's exactly what she'd created, a potion that would heighten emotional awareness while maintaining mental clarity. I didn't plan it, she admitted. I just followed what felt right. Grandmama's ancient face split into a wide grin. Now you're getting it. Magic isn't just about memorizing formulas, it's about listening to the ingredients, feeling how they want to combine. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Your mother knew that. Before she let the ministry job squeeze all the creativity out of her. Liz froze. Her mother worked as a potion regulator for the ministry's experimental charms department, a thoroughly by-the-book job cataloging and approving standardized potions. You knew my mother? Knew her? I taught her. Not officially, of course. But Amaryllis Thornfield spent a summer with the Addams family when she was about your age. Had quite the talent for creative brewing before she got all respectable. Grandmama cackled and moved on before Liz could ask any of the questions suddenly burning in her mind. By the end of the class, the room was filled with multicolored smoke, and the results varied dramatically. Maya had somehow created a potion that made her temporarily speak in rhymes. The Thornhill twins, working at adjacent stations, had produced an alarming substance that turned anything it touched invisible for precisely 7 minutes, demonstrated when one of them accidentally splashed Snape's left boot. Felix's potion was perhaps the most impressive, a shimmering gold liquid that, when a drop was placed on the back of his hand, allowed him to pass it straight through a solid stone wall. Fascinating approach to matter transmutation. Grandmama declared, while Snape confiscated the remainder with a dangerous glint in his eye. As they left the classroom, through a door that had reappeared in the wall, the students were buzzing with a mixture of terror and excitement. That was the most terrifying and brilliant class I've ever had, Finn declared, his hair still smoking slightly from when his first attempt had fountained upward and singed his eyebrows. Did you see what Patterson's potion did to his cauldron? Rowan added gleefully. It grew legs and ran away. We're all going to die before term ends, Maya moaned, still speaking in perfect rhyming couplets despite Snape's attempt to reverse the effect. Liz remained quiet, her mind racing with questions. Grandmama had known her mother. Had taught her unofficial potions. Why had her mother never mentioned spending time with the infamous Addams family? And more importantly, why had she abandoned whatever talent Grandmama claimed she'd had? Earth to Thornfield, Felix waved a hand in front of her face, breaking her reverie. You still with us, or did those fumes finally melt your brain? Just thinking, Liz replied automatically. Dangerous pastime. His tone was light, but his eyes were searching. What did she say to you? The old witch seemed particularly interested in your cauldron. Nothing important, Liz lied. Just commenting on my technique. Felix clearly didn't believe her but didn't press the issue. We have herbology next. Want to bet on whether the plants will try to eat us, or we'll be trying to eat them? Felix's question proved unnervingly prescient. The greenhouses had undergone a dramatic transformation overnight. The glass walls were now tinted a deep green that made the interior seem underwater, and the plants were definitely not part of the standard curriculum. Professor Sprout stood at the entrance to Greenhouse 4, looking simultaneously terrified and thrilled as she directed students to don what appeared to be chain-mail gloves and face shields. Special session today, she announced, her voice higher-pitched than usual. Headmistress Addams has introduced some specimens from her private collection. Remarkably rare opportunities for study. Inside, the greenhouse had been rearranged to create a path through what could only be described as a jungle. Plants with teeth snapped at the air. Vines with eye-like buds tracked students' movements. Something that resembled a massive flytrap, but large enough to consume a first year, gurgled ominously in the corner. Today we're studying defensive herbology, Professor Sprout explained, dodging as a tendril tried to snatch her hat. Plants that bite back, as it were. Most wizarding schools consider these specimens too dangerous for student interaction, but Headmistress Addams believes in hands-on learning. More like hands-off learning, Finn muttered as a nearby plant made a grab for his arm. As in, we might lose our hands. Professor Sprout divided them into pairs to catalog and collect samples from the various specimens. To Liz's surprise, she found herself partnered with Felix. Greenhouse of Death, he commented as they approached their assigned plant, a bush with shimmering silver leaves that emitted a high-pitched whine when they got too close. Remind me why we're doing this. Learning, Liz replied, cautiously extending her gloved hand toward the plant. Besides, aren't Slytherins supposed to appreciate the dangerous and powerful? Appreciate, yes. Stick our hands into, no. But Felix moved forward alongside her, wand at the ready. This is a singing silver snare. It's attracted to magical energy, the stronger the witch or wizard, the more it wants to connect. Connect? It uses those silver fibers to attach to a magical core and feed off it. Won't kill you, but you'll feel drained for days. How do you know that? Liz asked, pulling her hand back slightly. Felix's expression turned guarded. Family library. The Blackwoods have always had an interest in unusual magical specimens. The plant's whine intensified as they stood discussing it, the silver leaves vibrating until they became almost transparent. Without warning, hair-thin silver filaments shot out toward them both. Liz reacted instinctively, grabbing Felix's arm and pulling him down as the filaments sailed over their heads. They landed awkwardly, Felix half on top of her, faces inches apart. Thanks for the save, Thornfield, he said, voice oddly soft despite the chaos around them as other students battled their own aggressive plans. No problem. Liz was suddenly very aware of his proximity, the weight of his body against hers. Maybe we should. More silver filaments shot toward them. Felix rolled, taking Liz with him, and they narrowly avoided being hit again. It's getting more aggressive, he noted, pulling her behind a large terracotta pot for temporary shelter. We need to calm it down before we can collect a sample. How do we calm a plant that wants to drain our magic? Felix reached into his pocket and pulled out a small vial filled with golden liquid, the potion he'd created in class earlier. Distraction. If it's attracted to magic, let's give it something else to feed on. He uncorked the vial and, in a quick movement, darted out from behind the pot and splashed the contents onto the soil at the base of the singing silver snare. The effect was immediate, the plant's whine changed to something almost melodic, and it retracted its filaments, the silver leaves curling inward as it absorbed the magic from the potion. Quick, Now. Felix called. Liz dashed forward with pruning shears, snipping a small branch from the temporarily docile plant. Got it. She dropped the sample into their collection jar, which Professor Sprout had enchanted to neutralize the plant's defensive mechanisms. Excellent teamwork. Professor Sprout called approvingly from across the greenhouse, where she was helping disentangle a Hufflepuff boy from what appeared to be animated seaweed. The rest of the class passed in similar fashion: strategic retreats, creative solutions, and a growing collection of samples from plants that clearly wanted to turn the tables on who was studying whom. By the end, every student had at least one minor injury, and Rowan Thornhill was sporting what looked like the beginning of an impressive set of wooden antlers after getting too close to a transforming thornwood. "Hospital wing for you, Mr. Thornhill," Professor Sprout sighed as they exited the greenhouse. "The rest of you, excellent work today." 5 points to each pair that successfully collected their samples without major bodily transformation. As the class dispersed, Liz found herself walking beside Felix toward the castle. "Thanks for knowing about that plant," she said. "Your family library sounds interesting." Felix gave her a sidelong glance. "It is. Though most of the books would probably try to bite you. Are your family friends with the Addams? You seem to know a lot about Grandmama already." His expression closed off slightly. "Not friends exactly. Let's say our family histories are entangled. The Blackwoods have always practiced older forms of magic, though we're more discreet about it than the Addams clan." "Older forms like what?" Liz pressed, curious despite herself. "Magic tied to natural forces. Less wand-waving, more intent and will." Felix hesitated, then added, "The kind the Ministry started restricting after the International Statute of Secrecy was established. Is that why you're not freaking out about all these changes? Because it's familiar to you?" "I didn't say that." Felix stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Thornfield, be careful. Grandmama Addams seems to have taken an interest in you, and that's not always a good thing. The Addams family doesn't think about consequences the way normal people do. What seems like a fun experiment to them could be deadly for everyone else." "You sound worried about me," Liz said, surprised by his sudden intensity. Felix scoffed, his usual dismissive mask slipping back into place. "I'm worried about everyone. If one Ravenclaw gets eaten by a staircase, they'll increase security and ruin all our fun." He started walking again, calling over his shoulder, "See you at dinner, Thornfield. Try not to drink anything that makes you grow extra appendages." As the day wore on, it became clear that Grandmama's influence extended far beyond potions and plants. Charms class featured objects that talked back when spells were cast on them. Transfiguration now included a section on temporary self-transformation that had McGonagall looking like she might spontaneously combust from suppressed rage. By dinner time, the castle was buzzing with stories of bizarre encounters, portraits giving unsolicited, and often terrible, advice, bathroom fixtures that critiqued one's appearance, and a suit of armor on the 4th floor that challenged students to duels. The Great Hall had undergone yet another transformation. The ceiling now showed not the sky outside but what appeared to be an endless cosmic void scattered with stars and constellations no astronomer would recognize. The tables had been rearranged into one giant spiral, with Grandmama at the center, cackling as she tossed what looked suspiciously like eyeballs into her soup. "I can't take much more of this," Maya groaned, having finally stopped speaking in rhymes after a visit to the hospital wing. "I had to fight my own scarf this morning when it tried to strangle me." "Are you kidding? This is the best thing that's ever happened to Hogwarts," Finn declared, the wooden antlers his brother had sprouted having inspired him to grow his own set, deliberately, via a potion smuggled from class. "I actually want to go to lessons now." Liz picked at her food thoughtfully. Despite the chaos, or perhaps because of it, she had learned more practical magic today than in weeks of normal classes. The potion she'd created, the plant she'd helped collect, these were hands-on experiences that textbooks couldn't provide. A sudden hush fell over the hall as the candles dimmed dramatically. Grandmama rose from her seat, her wild hair creating a shadow on the wall behind her that seemed to move independently. "Such a delightful first day," she croaked, voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. "I'm pleased to see so many of you embracing the spirit of adventure. For those who survived today's lessons, congratulations. For those currently in the hospital wing, well, Madame Pomfrey assures me most of the transformations are temporary." A nervous titter ran through the students. "Now, I have an exciting announcement. Beginning tonight, I will be offering special evening sessions for those interested in more advanced magical exploration. Entirely voluntary, of course." Her grin suggested otherwise. Tonight's activity, a midnight expedition to the Forbidden Forest to collect moonberries that only bloom during the dark of the moon. McGonagall closed her eyes in what appeared to be physical pain. Those interested should meet at the main entrance at exactly midnight. Bring gloves, a sharp knife, and something shiny to distract the whispering wraiths. Oh, and do wear sturdy boots, the quicksand is particularly active this time of year. With that cheery announcement, Grandmama clapped her hands, and the candles returned to normal brightness. The buzz of conversation resumed, louder than before. "You're not actually considering going, are you?" Maya asked, noticing Liz's thoughtful expression. "I don't know," Liz admitted. "It sounds dangerous, but also, educational." "It sounds like suicide," Maya countered. "Whispering wraiths. Quicksand. No thank you." "I'm definitely going," Finn declared. "Rowan too, once Pomfrey gets rid of his antlers." Thornfield, Felix appeared again, sliding into a seat across from her with the ease of someone who considered house table segregation beneath him. "A word?" Liz raised an eyebrow but nodded. They moved to a quieter section of the spiral table arrangement. "Don't go tonight," he said without preamble, his voice low and urgent. "Why not? Scared of a few whispering wraiths?" Liz teased. "This isn't a joke." Felix's expression was deadly serious. "Moonberries that bloom during the dark moon aren't just rare ingredients, they're used in extremely powerful magical rituals. The kind that require sacrifice." Liz's smile faded. "What are you saying? That Grandmama is planning some kind of dark ritual?" "I'm saying there's more happening here than eccentric teaching methods." Felix ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "Look, my father sent me an owl this morning. The Blackwood family has connections with the Department of Mysteries, and something has them all on edge. Something about ancient boundaries weakening. What does that have to do with collecting berries?" "I don't know exactly. But I do know that my father specifically warned me to be careful around anything Grandmama Addams suggests as voluntary activities." He lowered his voice further. "She has a history of using students as unwitting participants in magical experiments." Liz thought of her midnight encounter in the kitchen, of Grandmama's cryptic comments about shadows gathering and Dumbledore preparing for something. "I think she's preparing us for something. Something Dumbledore knew was coming." Felix's eyes widened slightly. "What did she tell you?" Before Liz could respond, a blood-curdling shriek echoed through the hall. Students jumped to their feet as a pale, ghostly figure burst through the doors, the bloody Baron, looking more distraught than anyone had ever seen the normally composed Slytherin ghost. "The dungeons," he wailed, floating rapidly toward the teacher's table. "Something is coming through the walls." Grandmama stood, looking not alarmed but delighted. "Ah, earlier than expected. How wonderful. Esmeralda." McGonagall snapped, also rising. "What have you done?" "Nothing permanent, dear Minerva. Just a little renovation to reveal what was always there." Grandmama turned to address the now panicking students. "Everyone remain calm. This is simply the castle, stretching." As if on cue, a low rumbling sound filled the hall. The floor trembled beneath their feet, and the walls seemed to ripple like water. Several students screamed as the enchanted ceiling shimmered and revealed, just for a moment, not stars or sky but what appeared to be massive, ancient gears turning slowly. "Prefects, lead your houses back to your common rooms immediately," McGonagall commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Heads of houses, with me." As the students scrambled to comply, Liz found herself caught in the surge of bodies moving toward the doors. Felix grabbed her arm, keeping her close as they were jostled from all sides. "Still think it's just eccentric teaching methods," he shouted over the noise. "No," Liz admitted, a mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through her. "But I still want to know what she's really doing." They spilled out into the entrance hall along with dozens of other students. The rumbling had stopped, but there was a strange quality to the air, like static electricity before a storm. The portraits lining the walls were all empty, their occupants having fled to frames elsewhere in the castle. "Everyone keep moving," called the head boy, trying to direct traffic as students from all four houses crowded the space. Ravenclaws and Gryffindors, up the main staircase. Hufflepuffs and Slytherins, his instructions were cut short by another tremor, stronger than before. The massive chandelier overhead swayed dangerously. A chunk of stone broke free from one wall, narrowly missing a group of first years. And then, in the midst of the panic, the most extraordinary thing happened. The floor of the entrance hall opened. Not like a trapdoor or a crack in the stones, but like a mouth, the flagstones reshaping themselves to form what could only be described as lips and teeth. Several students fell screaming into the opening before it closed again with a satisfied smack. For one terrible moment, silence fell. Then everyone started screaming at once. Silence. The voice that boomed through the hall was not McGonagall's or any other teacher's. It was Grandmama Addams, suddenly standing in the center of the entrance hall though no one had seen her arrive. Her wild hair crackled with electricity, and her eyes glowed with an unearthly light. The screaming stopped abruptly. "That," she announced, gesturing to the now normal-looking floor, "is exactly why we need more practical education. Did a single one of you remember the hovering charm? The sticking charm? Any of the dozen defensive spells you've supposedly mastered?" Stunned silence greeted her questions. "Exactly. Book learning without practical application is useless. Those students aren't in any danger, the castle is simply introducing itself properly. They'll be deposited in their dormitories shortly, perhaps a bit damper and wiser than before." "You're insane," someone in the crowd muttered, not quite softly enough. Grandmama's face split into a terrifying grin. "Precisely. Sanity is vastly overrated when dealing with magic." She clapped her hands sharply. "Now, to your dormitories. And perhaps consider whether you might benefit from some midnight berry picking after all. Those with practical experience tend to fare better when the castle gets playful." As if to emphasize her point, the main staircase chose that moment to rotate 180 degrees, leaving a gaping void where the first steps should have been. "Well, that's inconvenient," Grandmama cackled. "I suppose you'll all have to get creative." And with that, she vanished with a crack, leaving chaos in her wake. Felix turned to Liz, his face pale but determined. "I'm finding another way to the dungeons." "You should, wait." Liz grabbed his arm, a thought suddenly occurring to her. "The ancient door you mentioned, the one beneath the castle. Could that be connected to what's happening?" "Maybe." Felix looked thoughtful despite the pandemonium around them. "My father's letter mentioned something about the heart of Hogwarts awakening. I assumed it was metaphorical, but what if it's literal? What if there's something under the castle that Grandmama is trying to wake up?" Liz felt a thrill of both fear and excitement. "The floor just 8 people, Felix. I don't think that's standard magical architecture." "No, it's not." His expression hardened with resolve. "Tomorrow morning, before breakfast. Meet me in the entrance hall. We're going to find that door." A distant scream echoed from somewhere in the castle, followed by what sounded disturbingly like maniacal laughter from the walls themselves. "If we survive until morning," Liz added grimly. There is that, Felix agreed. Try not to get eaten by your bed, Thornfield. Same to you, Blackwood. They parted ways, each joining their housemates in the creative process of finding alternate routes to their dormitories. Liz ended up part of a human chain as older students levitated younger ones across the gap where the staircase should have been, feeling as though she'd learned more practical magic in one chaotic day than in 5 previous years at Hogwarts. As she finally reached the safety of Ravenclaw Tower, after answering a riddle that giggled menacingly throughout, one thought kept circling in her mind: Grandmama Addams was either going to get them all killed, or she was preparing them for something that would try to kill them anyway. Either way, Liz was fairly certain that Hogwarts would never be the same again. Chapter 2, The Forbidden Lessons. Liz woke to screaming. Not her own, thank Merlin, but the terrified shriek of Maya as her hairbrush attempted to crawl up her arm. Get it off! Get it off! Maya flailed wildly, flinging the animated brush across their dormitory where it skittered under another girl's bed, bristles clicking like insect legs. Immobulus! Liz cast from her bed, freezing the brush mid-scuttle. That's the 3rd one this week. It had been 5 days since Grandmama Addams took over Hogwarts, and inanimate objects developing personalities was now just part of daily life. The castle's bizarre transformation that first night had been just the beginning. Corridors rearranged themselves hourly. Classrooms migrated between floors. Just yesterday, the entire Hufflepuff dormitory had somehow relocated to the astronomy tower, leaving confused badgers to navigate an altitude change that played havoc with their eardrums. I can't take much more of this, Maya moaned, inspecting her arm for bristle marks. My parents are going to murder me if I get sent home missing limbs. At least you'd have a cool story, Liz offered, rolling out of bed and eyeing her own hairbrush suspiciously. Better than, died of boredom during History of Magic. Speaking of which, Maya checked her watch and yelped. We're late. McGonagall's going to feed us to whatever's living in the dungeons now. They scrambled into robes and grabbed their bags, foregoing breakfast as they raced through the common room. The trick step on the main staircase had developed a taste for ankle socks, so they'd taken to leaping over it with practiced precision. Did you finish the Transfiguration essay? Maya panted as they rounded a corner. Started it, but got distracted by that weird book in the library, you know, the one that kept whispering dark prophecies. Honestly, Liz, your priorities. They skidded to a halt at the sight before them. The entrance hall was filled with stern-looking witches and wizards in official ministry robes, all wearing expressions that ranged from concerned to outright horrified. At their center stood a pompous-looking man with an impressively waxed mustache whom Liz recognized immediately from the Daily Prophet, Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic himself. Completely unacceptable. Fudge was saying, his bowler hat quivering with indignation as he addressed Grandmama Addams, who looked supremely unbothered in a dress that appeared to be made from spider silk and bat wings. The Board of Governors has received 17 official complaints from parents. 17. Only 17. Grandmama cackled. How disappointing. I'd hoped for at least 50 by now. McGonagall, standing rigidly beside her, closed her eyes briefly as if praying for strength. This is no laughing matter. Fudge spluttered. Students writing home about carnivorous staircases. Potions classes where they brew hallucinogens. A suit of armor that challenges first years to duels to the death. Oh, Alphonse never actually kills them, Grandmama waved dismissively. Just maims a little. Builds character. One of the ministry officials made a strangled noise. We've come to conduct a thorough inspection, Fudge declared, puffing up importantly. If conditions are as reported, the ministry may have no choice but to, yes, close the school, replace me, bind my powers, blah blah blah. Grandmama cut him off with another dismissive wave. How tedious. Well, if you insist on an inspection, you're welcome to it. Minerva, would you be a dear and show our guests around? I have a batch of enlightenment elixir that needs stirring, or the eyeballs will congeal. McGonagall looked like she might spontaneously combust from the effort of maintaining professionalism. Of course, Headmistress. Minister, if you and your team would follow me, actually, Fudge interrupted, I think it best if Madame Addams herself conducts the tour. We want to see exactly how she's running things. Grandmama's eyes gleamed with an unholy light that made Liz want to hide under the nearest table. How delightful. I'd be happy to show you my improvements. We'll start with the dungeons. I've been breeding the most fascinating hybrid of Devil's Snare and Portuguese Man-o'-War down there. The tentacles can detect lies, you know. Most educational for students prone to making excuses about homework. The blood drained from Fudge's face, but he stood his ground. Lead the way, madam. Shouldn't we get to class? Maya whispered, tugging on Liz's sleeve. And miss this? Not a chance, Liz whispered back, pulling Maya behind a convenient tapestry as the inspection party moved toward the dungeon stairs. Besides, transfiguration can wait. This is about to get interesting. By interesting, you mean disastrous, Maya hissed, but she didn't resist further. From their hiding spot, they couldn't see what was happening below, but the sounds that soon floated up were enough: startled shouts, a splash, then screaming. Lots of screaming. That can't be good, Maya muttered. The screaming grew louder as the party returned to the entrance hall at considerable speed. The ministry officials were no longer the dignified group they'd been minutes before. Two were soaking wet and covered in what looked like purple suction marks. Another was hopping on one foot, the other foot apparently transformed into something resembling a duck's webbed appendage. Fudge himself appeared unharmed but was so pale he looked like he might faint. Perfectly normal behavior for adolescent aquatic hybrids, Grandmama was saying cheerfully as she followed them up. They're just being playful. You should see them when they're actually hungry. This is outrageous. Fudge spluttered. Those creatures are Class XXXX restricted magical beings. Classification is so limiting, don't you think? Grandmama sighed. Next you'll be telling me I can't keep my pet Nundu in the staff room. You have a Nundu? The collective shriek from the ministry team echoed off the stone walls. Grandmama winked at them. Well, he's only half Nundu. His mother was a particularly ambitious house cat. That's impossible, one of the officials whispered. Nothing's impossible with the right potion and a full moon, Grandmama countered with a wink that made several officials take involuntary steps backward. Now, shall we continue to the greenhouses? Professor Sprout has done wonders with those strangling snapping snapdragons I brought from home. Before anyone could respond, a thunderous crash echoed from somewhere above, followed by what sounded like maniacal giggling. Moments later, the Thornhill twins came tearing around the corner, faces streaked with soot, robes singed at the edges. Run for your lives! Rowan yelled as they sprinted past the astonished ministry group. The suits of armor have unionized. On cue, a battalion of animated armor came clanking down the grand staircase, brandishing swords, and what appeared to be hastily made picket signs demanding better polish and no more student graffiti. Chaos erupted. Ministry officials scattered like startled pigeons, one unlucky wizard tripping over his robes and falling directly in the path of the armored uprising. A suit that appeared to be the leader pointed its sword at the cowering man. Surrender the wax, it demanded in a tinny voice. I don't have any wax, the man squeaked. The armor considered this for a moment. Then surrender your mustache. It appears well maintained. My mustache? Grandmama stepped forward, clapping her hands sharply. Now, Sir Clankington, what have we discussed about threatening ministry officials? The armor tilted its helmet, somehow managing to look chastened despite having no face. Only on officially sanctioned holidays. Precisely. Back to your posts, all of you. You can present your demands at the next staff meeting like we agreed. With much clanking and muttered metallic grumbling, the suits of armor turned and marched back up the stairs. You see. Grandmama beamed at Fudge, who looked ready to have an aneurysm. Just a minor labor dispute. The castle's awakening has given voice to many previously silent entities. I find it all rather progressive. The castle is not meant to be awake. Fudge nearly shouted. Hogwarts is a school, not a sentient magical experiment. Grandmama's smile vanished, replaced by something ancient and coldly furious that made the temperature in the hall seem to drop several degrees. You are wrong, Minister. Hogwarts was always meant to be awake. The founders built it that way, before fearful men like you decided that magic should be tamed, contained, regulated until it lost all its wild wonder. She stepped closer to Fudge, who shrank back despite himself. Dumbledore understood this. Why do you think he arranged for me to take his place? Arranged? Fudge sputtered. Dumbledore is missing. Is he? Grandmama's crooked smile returned. Or is he exactly where he needs to be, doing exactly what needs to be done while I prepare the school and its students? Prepare them for what? One of the braver officials dared to ask. Grandmama's eyes gleamed. For what's coming, of course. A tense silence fell. Even from their hiding place, Liz could feel the crackle of magic in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. Fudge rallied his courage. Madam Addams, I think we've seen quite enough. As Minister for Magic, I hereby, whatever he was about to declare was cut off as Grandmama flicked her fingers casually in his direction. In an instant, the Minister for Magic transformed into a large, warty toad that sat blinking in confusion atop his fallen bowler hat. The remaining officials gasped in unison. Much better, Grandmama nodded with satisfaction. Don't worry, it's temporary. Probably. She turned to the horrified group. Now then, who wants to see the library? The restricted section has been doing the most fascinating mating dance with the arithmancy texts. No one moved. They all stared at their amphibious leader, then at Grandmama, then at each other in mute horror. No takers. Pity. She bent down and picked up the fudge toad, placing him gently on her shoulder where he sat frozen in apparent shock. Well, I suppose our tour is concluded then. Do feel free to submit your reports to whoever's in charge while Minister Fudge is indisposed. With as much dignity as they could muster, the ministry officials backed slowly toward the entrance doors, no one willing to turn their back on the witch who had just casually transformed the Minister for Magic. Oh, and do come back next week. Grandmama called after them cheerfully. We're planning to relocate the lake inside the Great Hall. The giant squid has always wanted to attend feasts. The doors slammed behind the fleeing officials with an ominous finality. From behind the tapestry, Liz and Maya exchanged stunned looks. She turned the minister into a toad, Maya whispered, eyes wide with horror and something that might have been reluctant admiration. I know, Liz agreed, feeling a mixture of shock and inappropriate amusement. That might actually be the coolest thing I've ever seen. Miss Thornfield, Grandmama's voice called, making them both jump. You can come out now, unless you plan to become a permanent part of the wall decor. Though you'd make a lovely tapestry figure, I'm sure. Busted, the girls emerged from their hiding place, Maya looking mortified while Liz tried for an innocent expression that fooled absolutely no one. Spying is an excellent life skill, Grandmama nodded approvingly. Though your technique needs work. You were breathing so loudly I could hear you over Minister Ribbity's croaking. The toad on her shoulder gave an indignant rib bit, as if understanding the slight. We were just, Maya began. Late for class, Grandmama finished for her. Professor McGonagall will understand when you explain you were getting a practical lesson in political transformation. She winked. Run along now, Miss Chong. I need to borrow Miss Thornfield for a special assignment. Maya hesitated, looking at Liz with concern. It's fine, Liz assured her, curiosity already overwhelming any sense of self-preservation. I'll catch up later. With a worried glance at the toad, Maya hurried off, leaving Liz alone with Grandmama and their amphibious government leader. Am I in trouble? Liz asked once Maya was out of earshot. Trouble? Grandmama cackled. Child, we're all in trouble. That's what makes life interesting. She gestured for Liz to follow her. Come along. It's time for your first proper lesson. But I have transfiguration, Minerva will understand. Or she won't. Either way, this is more important. Intrigued despite herself, Liz followed as Grandmama led her not toward the headmistress's office but down a corridor Liz was certain hadn't existed the day before. The walls here were older, rougher stone, with no portraits or windows, just ancient sconces holding blue flames that cast eerie shadows. Where are we going? Liz asked, trying to memorize their route in case she needed to find her way back alone. To the heart, Grandmama replied cryptically, the fudge toad still perched on her shoulder like a bizarre familiar. The castle is changing, Miss Thornfield. Remembering what it once was. What it was meant to be. They descended a spiral staircase that seemed to go down much further than should have been possible given the castle's layout. The air grew colder, damper, carrying scents of earth and something older, like ancient parchment and stone that hadn't seen light in centuries. Finally, they reached a small landing with a single door. Unlike the heavy wooden doors throughout most of the castle, this one appeared to be made of some dark metal etched with symbols Liz didn't recognize, though they tickled at the edge of her memory like something she'd seen in an ancient rune's text. This is the door Felix mentioned, she realized aloud. The one that wasn't here before. Ah, young Mr. Blackwood has been busy, Grandmama noted with approval. Yes, this door has always been here, but few could find it, and fewer still could open it. Until now. She placed her gnarled hand flat against the metal, which seemed to warm and glow faintly at her touch. The founders created Hogwarts with a purpose beyond education, you see. They built it over a nexus point, a place where magical ley lines converge, creating power beyond imagining. The symbols on the door began to glow more brightly, pulsing like a heartbeat. For centuries, that power has been contained, controlled, allowed to flow only in the most regulated ways. Dumbledore began the process of awakening it, but he knew he couldn't complete the work himself. The ministry was watching him too closely. So he brought you in, Liz said, pieces clicking together. By disappearing dramatically enough that the ministry would panic and accept whoever could take over quickly. Grandmama's eyes gleamed with approval. Precisely. Albus and I have history. He knew I would continue what he started. She turned back to the door. The Addams family has always understood the true nature of magic, wild, chaotic, alive. The ministry fears what it cannot control, so they've spent generations convincing witches and wizards that magic must be tamed, practiced only in approved ways. The door was now glowing bright enough to illuminate the small landing entirely, the symbols shifting and rearranging themselves like living things. What's behind the door? Liz asked, both fascinated and apprehensive. The heart of Hogwarts. Grandmama stepped back, gesturing for Liz to approach. And it wants to meet you. Me? Why? Because you have your mother's gift, the ability to see magic as it truly is, not just what you've been taught it should be. Grandmama's expression grew serious. That's rare these days. Most young witches and wizards never question what they're taught. They accept limitations that exist only in books and bureaucracy. Liz hesitated, then stepped forward, drawn by curiosity and something deeper, a pull she couldn't explain. She placed her hand where Grandmama's had been. The metal felt warm, alive, pulsing like a heartbeat against her palm. The symbols glowed brighter at her touch, swirling faster. What do I do? She whispered. Listen, Grandmama replied simply. Not with your ears. With your magic. Closing her eyes, Liz tried to focus, to feel beyond the physical sensation of metal against her skin. For several moments, there was nothing. Then, a whisper. Not a sound exactly, but a presence. A consciousness vast and ancient, curious and cautious, reaching out to touch her mind. Images flooded her thoughts, Hogwarts as it had first been built, wild magic flowing freely through its halls. The founders channeling that power, using it to protect and nurture young minds. Then darkness, fear, restrictions as later generations grew afraid of what they couldn't understand. The castle's consciousness slowly falling asleep, dreaming through centuries of diminished purpose. Until now. Until Dumbledore began the awakening. Until Grandmama continued it. Liz gasped, pulling her hand away as the intensity of the contact became overwhelming. The symbols on the door faded back to a dull glow. "It's alive," she breathed. "The castle is actually alive. All magic is alive, child. Most have simply forgotten how to listen to it." Grandmama reached up to pat the fudge toad, who had remained remarkably still throughout the exchange. "That's what I'm here to teach, starting with those students who can already hear the whispers. Like me. Like you." Grandmama nodded. "Your mother had the gift too, before she let the ministry convince her to ignore it. That's why I've chosen you for special lessons, to ensure her daughter doesn't make the same mistake." A mixture of pride and unease swirled through Liz. Special lessons with Grandmama Addams could be as dangerous as they were educational. But the memory of that ancient consciousness reaching out to her, recognizing her, how could she turn away from that? What would these lessons involve? She asked cautiously. Grandmama's face split into a wide, slightly terrifying grin. "The magic they don't teach in classrooms. The old ways. The wild ways." She turned, heading back up the spiral staircase. "Meet me in the North Tower at midnight. Wear clothes you don't mind getting singed, and bring something that belongs to a loved one." Why a loved one's possession? Because intent matters in the oldest magics, and nothing focuses intent like emotional connection. Grandmama paused, glancing back. "Oh, and not a word to anyone, especially not to young Mr. Blackwood, despite his involvement in your explorations." Liz frowned. "Why not Felix? The Blackwood family has its own agenda concerning Hogwarts awakening. Not necessarily opposed to ours, but..." She shrugged. "Complicated by history. You'll understand in time." With that cryptic statement, Grandmama continued up the stairs, the fudge toad still riding contentedly on her shoulder, leaving Liz to follow with far more questions than answers. By lunchtime, the entire school was buzzing with news of the ministry inspection disaster. Stories grew more outlandish with each retelling. Fudge hadn't just been transformed into a toad, he'd been fed to the giant squid. The entire ministry delegation had been turned into various amphibians and relocated to the lake. Grandmama had threatened to turn the Minister of Magic inside out if he interfered again. Liz, picking at her shepherd's pie in the Great Hall, didn't bother correcting any of the rumors. Her mind was still reeling from the morning's revelation about the castle and Grandmama's invitation to secret midnight lessons. "Completely mental," Finn was saying, gesturing wildly with a fork loaded with mashed potatoes. "The armor's still on strike. They've barricaded the third-floor corridor and are demanding polish rights." "Better polish than what happened to the ghosts," his twin countered. Nearly headless Nick's head fell off completely during History of Magic. Scared Bin so badly he actually stopped lecturing for 30 seconds. Maya leaned toward Liz. "Where did she take you this morning? You missed all of Transfiguration and half of Charms." "Just, showed me some things about the castle," Liz hedged, remembering Grandmama's warning about secrecy. "Old passages, hidden rooms, that sort of thing." "You're lying," Maya narrowed her eyes. "You've got that look, the one where you've discovered something dangerous and fascinating and are trying to decide if it's worth getting expelled over." "I don't have a look," Liz protested weakly. "You absolutely do," Felix confirmed, appearing beside her and sitting down uninvited. "It's the same look you had before you tried to breed fire crabs with blast-ended scruts in 4th year. That was a legitimate magical husbandry experiment," Liz defended, "and I still maintain it would have worked if Hagrid hadn't caught me." "The point is," Felix continued, "you're plotting something, Thornfield. And given the current state of Hogwarts under Grandmama's reign of terror, that's concerning. Reign of Terror. That's a bit dramatic, even for you. Is it? Felix raised an eyebrow. This morning, my shower turned all the Slytherin boys' hair into snakes. Actual, hissing, venomous snakes. Zabini got bit on the ear and had to go to the hospital wing. His left side is still paralyzed. Sounds like an improvement, Finn quipped from across the table. Least now he has an excuse for his terrible Quidditch performance. Felix ignored him. The point is, things are getting more dangerous by the day. And now I hear you're getting private tours from the Chaos Witch herself. He lowered his voice. Did she show you the door? Liz hesitated. Yes. Did you open it? No. But I touched it. It responded to me. Felix's expression darkened. Just as I thought. She's recruiting. Recruiting for what? Maya asked, now thoroughly invested in the conversation. The awakening, Felix replied grimly. My father sent another owl this morning. The Department of Mysteries is in an uproar. They've detected magical disturbances centered on Hogwarts, power fluctuations unlike anything they've recorded in centuries. Isn't that a good thing? Rowan asked, leaning in. More magic means more fun, right? More magic means more danger, Felix corrected. The old powers weren't contained just because some bureaucrats were afraid of them. They were contained because they could be catastrophic if mishandled. Liz thought of the ancient consciousness she'd felt behind the door, curious, powerful, but not malevolent. I don't think it's as simple as that. Of course you don't, Felix sighed. You're exactly the type to think awakening ancient, potentially world-ending magic sounds like a brilliant afternoon project. Says the boy from the family with a library full of dark arts books, Liz countered. Not dark. Old. There's a difference. Felix ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Look, just, be careful. My family has history with the Addams clan, and it's not all pleasant tea parties and exchanging ancient spells. There have been incidents. What kind of incidents? Liz pressed. Felix glanced around, then leaned closer. The last time an Addams and a Blackwood worked together on experimental magic, 3 villages disappeared overnight. Not destroyed, disappeared. As if they'd never existed. Only those with direct blood connections to the inhabitants remembered them at all. A chill ran down Liz's spine. When was this? 1843, Felix's voice dropped even lower. My great-great-grandfather and grandmama herself. They were trying to access a pocket dimension for additional storage space. Storage space caused villages to disappear. The point, Felix said through gritted teeth, is that Addams' magic doesn't operate by normal rules, and the consequences aren't always predictable or controllable. Even by them. Before Liz could respond, a commotion at the entrance to the Great Hall drew everyone's attention. Professor McGonagall stood there, her normally immaculate appearance disheveled, hat askew, and expression thunderous. Beside her stood the new defense against the dark arts teacher, Professor Hawthorne, a tall, lean man with prematurely gray hair who had maintained a low profile since the term began, largely overshadowed by Grandmama's dramatic presence. Where is she? McGonagall demanded, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet hall. Where is Esmeralda? As if summoned by the question, Grandmama appeared, not from either entrance but seemingly from within the stone wall itself, stepping through solid rock as casually as walking through a doorway. You bellowed, Minerva, she asked pleasantly, brushing stone dust from her shoulder. The Minister for Magic, McGonagall said through clenched teeth, is still a toad. Is he? Grandmama looked surprised. How careless of me. I could have sworn that spell would wear off by lunchtime. It's been 6 hours. Has it? Time flies when you're revolutionizing magical education. Grandmama glanced around the great hall at the hundreds of students watching with rapt attention. Perhaps a practical demonstration is in order. Reversal of amphibious transfiguration is covered in 7th-year studies, is it not? This is not a teaching moment. McGonagall nearly shouted. This is a diplomatic crisis. Nonsense. Everything is a teaching moment. Grandmama turned to the students. Who can tell me the standard counterspell for human to amphibian transformation? A tentative hand rose from the Ravenclaw table. Yes, Miss Clearwater. Hominum revelio combined with a targeted finite incantatum, the 7th-year prefect suggested. A textbook answer, Grandmama nodded. 5 points to Ravenclaw. But textbooks were written by committee, and committees, like ministers, are often wrong. She reached into a pocket of her voluminous black dress and pulled out the fudge toad, who looked considerably less placid than before, his warty skin now an alarming shade of puce. The true counterspell requires understanding the fundamental nature of both forms and finding the bridge between them. She placed the toad on the head table and pointed one gnarled finger at him. Animus revelatum. A flash of green light enveloped the toad, which began to swell and stretch in distinctly uncomfortable-looking ways. For a horrifying moment, it appeared to be simultaneously toad and human, a bloated, warty figure with bulging eyes and stubby limbs that thrashed in apparent agony. Several students gasped or turned away. McGonagall stepped forward in alarm, but Professor Hawthorne placed a restraining hand on her arm, his expression intent as he watched the transformation. Finally, with a pop like a champagne cork, Cornelius Fudge reappeared, sprawled across the head table in his rumpled suit, bowler hat still missing. Outrageous assault on my person, he was mid-shout, apparently continuing a tirade that had been interrupted by his transformation. He blinked, looking around in confusion at his changed surroundings. What, how, where am I? Welcome back, Minister, Grandmama said cheerfully. You make a much more eloquent human than Toad, though I must say your complexion was more becoming in amphibian form. Fudge scrambled to his feet, face flushing with rage and embarrassment as he became aware of the hundreds of students watching. This is the final straw, Madam Addams. I will have you removed from this position immediately. Aurors will be dispatched. Your wand will be confiscated. Oh my, Grandmama pressed a hand to her chest in mock concern. Such dire threats. However shall I manage without a wand? She wiggled her fingers, and sparks of blue fire danced between them without any wand in sight. Fudge paled visibly. Perhaps, Professor Hawthorne spoke up, his deep voice cutting through the tension, this conversation would be better continued in private, Minister. An excellent suggestion, McGonagall agreed quickly. Students, finish your lunch promptly and proceed to afternoon classes. No one moved, all too riveted by the drama unfolding. Now, McGonagall added with enough force that even the most curious began gathering their things. As the great hall reluctantly emptied, Liz caught a final glimpse of the confrontation at the head table, Fudge gesticulating wildly, McGonagall trying to mediate and Grandmama looking entirely too amused by the whole situation. But what caught Liz's attention was Professor Hawthorne, standing slightly apart, watching not the minister or McGonagall, but Grandmama herself with an expression of calculated assessment that seemed at odds with his usual mild demeanor. That was interesting, she murmured as Felix steered her toward the exit. Which part? The minister's toad transformation or the fact that our defense teacher looks like he's cataloging Grandmama's weaknesses? So he'd noticed too. Hawthorne's been suspiciously quiet since term started. Too quiet, Felix agreed. Everyone else has had to deal with Grandmama's chaos, animated furniture attacking their classrooms, lesson plans rewriting themselves, random explosions. But Hawthorne's classes have been completely normal. Maybe he's just really good at damage control. Or maybe, Felix said quietly as they exited into the corridor, he has some protection Grandmama respects. Or fears. The thought was unsettling. What could possibly make Grandmama Addams cautious? We need to find out more about him, Liz decided. Background, credentials, how he got the job. Already working on it, Felix confirmed. My father's looking into ministry records. Meanwhile, he glanced around before continuing, "Did you find anything else about the door? What's behind it?" Liz hesitated, torn between her promise to Grandmama and her growing partnership with Felix. "I didn't see behind it," she said carefully. "But I felt something. The castle itself, maybe. A consciousness." "Salazar's snakes," Felix breathed. "The legends were true." "What legends?" "My family has stories about Hogwarts founding, different from the official history. They say the four founders didn't just build a school, they bound an ancient power to serve as its heart and guardian. Something old and powerful that existed in this place long before humans arrived." The description matched what Liz had sensed, that vast, ancient awareness. "So the castle really is alive. More than alive. Sentient. With its own will and agenda." Felix's expression grew grave. "And if Grandmama is awakening it fully, after centuries of containment? Could that be what Dumbledore wanted? Maybe this power is needed for something. Or maybe he disappeared because he realized what would happen if it fully awakened, and he couldn't stop it." Felix ran a hand through his hair. "We need more information." "Tonight, I can't tonight," Liz interrupted, remembering her midnight appointment. "I've got a thing." Felix narrowed his eyes. "A thing." "Study group," she lied. "For the charms practical." "You're a terrible liar, Thornfield." He studied her face. "She's got to you already, hasn't she? Secret lessons. Forbidden magic. Promises of power beyond your wildest dreams." "It's not like that," Liz protested, then sighed. "Okay, it's exactly like that. But I need to know what she's teaching. If something dangerous is happening, isn't it better to understand it from the inside? Not if understanding it gets you killed. Or worse." "What's worse than killed?" Felix's expression darkened. "There are fates worse than death, Liz. The Addams family knows most of them intimately." The use of her first name rather than her surname caught Liz off guard. Felix sounded genuinely worried, not just his usual sarcastic concern. "I'll be careful," she promised. "But I need to do this. If I learn anything important, I'll tell you." He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But if you're not at breakfast tomorrow, I'm assuming the worst and coming after you with the entire Slytherin Quidditch team as backup. They'd be useless in a fight against Grandmama." "Yes, but they make excellent human shields while I make my heroic escape." Despite the tension, Liz laughed. "Your concern is touching. Don't get used to it, Thornfield." But his brief smile took the sting from the words before he turned and headed toward his next class, leaving Liz to wonder exactly where the line between their rivalry and friendship now stood. The North Tower at midnight was even creepier than Liz had anticipated. The usual divination classroom had been transformed, furniture pushed against the walls, floor cleared to reveal ancient flagstones carved with symbols similar to those on the mysterious door. Blue flames burned in braziers around the perimeter, casting long shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Grandmama stood in the center of the room, wearing what appeared to be ceremonial robes of midnight blue embroidered with silver constellations that shifted position as she moved. "Right on time," she noted as Liz entered. Punctuality, a vastly underrated magical skill. Time itself can be an ingredient in the oldest spells. "Are we doing a spell tonight?" Liz asked, clutching the small object she'd brought, a silver bookmark her mother had given her on her 11th birthday, just before she'd started at Hogwarts. "All magic is spell work, child, whether spoken aloud or merely thought." Grandmama gestured for Liz to join her in the center of the carved circle. "Did you bring an item with emotional connection?" Liz held out the bookmark. "It was a gift from my mother." Grandmama took it, turning it over in her gnarled fingers. "Ah, yes. Amaryllis always did have excellent taste in silver." She handed it back. "Keep it close. Tonight's lesson focuses on intent and will, the foundations of wandless magic. Wandless magic? Liz couldn't hide her excitement. But that's not taught until advanced aura training. Another artificial restriction, Grandmama scoffed. Young witches and wizards perform wandless magic constantly before receiving their first wands. The ability doesn't disappear, it's deliberately suppressed through training that makes you dependent on a wooden stick. But wands focus and strengthen our magic, Liz objected, repeating what she'd been taught since her first year. They focus, yes. Channel, direct, control. But strengthen? No. Grandmama's eyes gleamed in the blue light. They limit you to what can flow through that particular conduit. Like trying to empty an ocean through a straw. She gestured, and the blue flames in the braziers rose higher, throwing wild shadows across the walls. Wands were invented to make magic safer, more predictable. To establish who could and couldn't access certain types of power. A method of control, disguised as a tool of empowerment. Liz frowned. The idea challenged everything she'd been taught about magical theory. But then why do wandless spells require such concentration and power? Shouldn't they be easier without the limitation? Clever girl. Grandmama nodded approvingly. They require concentration precisely because you've been taught to believe they should. Your entire magical education has convinced you that wandless magic is difficult, advanced, nearly impossible except for the most powerful witches and wizards. She pointed to the bookmark in Liz's hand. Hold that item. Feel its connection to your mother, to your own past. Now close your eyes and remember a time before Hogwarts, before you ever held a wand. Remember feeling magic flow through you freely, responding to your emotions and desires. Liz closed her eyes, thinking back to childhood incidents of accidental magic, making her stuffed animals dance when she was happy, shattering windows during a tantrum, floating down safely after jumping from a tree on a dare. The magic then had felt different. Raw. Immediate. Connected directly to her emotions and will. That feeling, Grandmama's voice came softly, as if from a great distance, is true magic. Not the domesticated version taught in classrooms, but the wild power that flows through all living things. Liz could almost sense it again, that current of energy running through her, connecting her to the world around her. Now, still holding that memory, that feeling, open your eyes and look at your hand. Liz obeyed. The bookmark in her palm was glowing with a soft silver light. Don't think of a spell, Grandmama instructed. Don't reach for your wand. Just, want the light to rise. Want it to rise, Liz thought, focusing on the glowing silver. Imagine it floating upward. Nothing happened. You're still thinking like a witch trained at Hogwarts, Grandmama observed. Focusing on technique, on what should happen. Let go of should. Magic doesn't care about rules. It responds to will and intent. Liz tried again, focusing not on making the light rise but simply knowing it would, the same certainty she'd had as a child that her magic would protect her from the fall from the tree. The silver glow detached from the bookmark, rising from her palm like a tiny star, hovering in the air between them. Good, Grandmama nodded. Now shape it. Again, Liz didn't try to force the light into a new form. She simply knew it was a bird, could see its wings and tail feathers formed of silver light. And as she held that image in her mind, the light responded, reshaping itself into a small, luminous swallow that fluttered around her head. Excellent, Grandmama's voice held genuine approval. The first step in unlearning what limits you. The little bird dissolved back into formless light, then winked out entirely. Liz felt a momentary sense of loss. That was incredible, she breathed. I've never done anything like that without a wand and an incantation. Because you believed you couldn't, Grandmama replied simply. Magical education as it exists today is as much about teaching limitations as it is about teaching skills. They've convinced generations of witches and wizards that certain magics are advanced, or dark, or impossible, except for the few. But some types of magic are dangerous, Liz pointed out. There's a reason for restrictions on things like the unforgivable curses. Intent matters, Grandmama agreed unexpectedly. The darkest magics require harmful intent. But many so-called dangerous practices were classified that way not because they're inherently harmful, but because they couldn't be easily regulated. She moved to one of the braziers, passing her hand through the blue flames without apparent discomfort. The Addams family has preserved these older practices, passed down through generations outside the influence of ministries and their arbitrary classifications. Is that what you're teaching me? Addams family magic? I'm teaching you to question what you've been told is possible. Grandmama fixed her with those unsettlingly sharp eyes. The rest will follow naturally, as you unlearn your limitations. For the next 2 hours, they practiced wandless magic, not just simple levitation or illumination, but transfiguration, elemental manipulation, and even a form of short-range apparition that didn't require the usual uncomfortable compression sensation. By the time they finished, Liz was exhausted but exhilarated. She'd accomplished feats of wandless magic that should have been impossible for a 6th-year student, or indeed, for most fully qualified wizards. You have your mother's aptitude, Grandmama observed as they concluded. A pity she chose to suppress it. What happened with my mother? Liz asked, seizing the opportunity. You mentioned she spent a summer with your family, but she's never talked about it. Grandmama's ancient face took on a distant expression. Amaryllis Vance was brilliant, creative, intuitive, naturally gifted with the older magics. She came to us through a connection with my granddaughter Morticia. They met at a specialized potion symposium in Romania. Amaryllis was fascinated by our family's brewing techniques, unbound by ministry regulations. So she studied with you? For one summer, yes. She had extraordinary potential, particularly in transformative potions that worked with the dringer's own magical essence. Grandmama's expression darkened. Then she returned to Britain, took a ministry position, married your father, and systematically suppressed everything she'd learned with us. Became a model of magical conformity, enforcing the very restrictions she had once questioned. The bitterness in Grandmama's voice was unmistakable. Why? Liz pressed. What changed her mind? Fear. Grandmama spat the word. Not of the magic itself, but of how others would perceive her if they knew what she could do. The magical community can be unforgiving to those who step outside accepted practices. Liz thought of her mother, always proper, always careful, following ministry regulations to the letter in her work approving standardized potions. It was difficult to imagine her experimenting with ancient, boundary-pushing magic. Is that why you chose me for these lessons? Because of my mother? Partly, Grandmama admitted. I hoped her daughter might have inherited not just her talent but her initial courage. Before fear won out. She fixed Liz with a penetrating stare. The question is, will you also choose safety and conformity when faced with the full implications of what you're learning? The challenge hung in the air between them. I don't know, Liz answered honestly. I don't even fully understand what those implications are yet. Grandmama's face split into that unsettling grin. A truthful answer. How refreshing. Most would immediately declare their unwavering commitment to the path of power, without understanding its cost. She nodded approvingly. We'll meet again tomorrow night. Same time, same place. Bring your wand. My wand? But I thought, that we're abandoning wand magic entirely. No, no. Tools have their uses. It's dependence that limits you, not the tool itself. Grandmama waved a dismissive hand. Now off to bed. Growing witches need their rest, especially when they're sneaking around with young Slytherins during daylight hours. Liz felt her cheeks warm. Felix and I are just, collaborating. Conspiring. Contemplating matters beyond your current understanding. Grandmama's eyes twinkled with mischief. Whatever you call it, do be careful. The Blackwood family's interest in Hogwarts awakening may align with ours temporarily, but they have their own agenda. They always do. With that cryptic warning, she shooed Liz toward the door. Sleep well, Miss Thornfield. Tomorrow's lessons, both formal and forbidden, promise to be even more interesting than today's. Liz slept fitfully, dreams filled with glowing doors and silver birds and Felix warning her about fates worse than death. She woke feeling gritty-eyed but vibrant with magical energy, as though the previous night's wandless practice had activated something dormant within her. Breakfast was a subdued affair. The staff table was missing several key members. Grandmama, McGonagall, and Professor Hawthorne were all conspicuously absent. Rumors spread through the great hall that the Minister for Magic had returned with orders to arrest Grandmama, though no one could agree on whether this had already happened or was imminent. She's probably turned them all into garden gnomes by now, Finn suggested through a mouthful of toast. Or they've got her locked in Azkaban, a nearby Hufflepuff countered. Felix slid onto the bench beside Liz, looking even more exhausted than she felt. You're alive, then. Last I checked, she confirmed. Were you worried? Concerned enough to skip astronomy and check the hospital wing, the North Tower, and 3 broom closets where Grandmama has allegedly been storing students who displease her. Liz raised an eyebrow. You looked for me in broom closets? I was thorough. Felix helped himself to her untouched orange juice. So, forbidden knowledge? Ancient secrets? Power beyond mortal comprehension? Something like that, Liz admitted, unwilling to share specific details in the crowded hall. Nothing world-ending. Yet. Reassuring. His tone suggested it was anything but. Any sign of our absent headmistress this morning? None. McGonagall and Hawthorne are missing too. Interesting timing. Felix leaned closer, lowering his voice. My father sent another owl. The Department of Mysteries detected a massive magical surge from Hogwarts last night, around midnight. Liz kept her expression carefully neutral, though her pulse quickened. That would have coincided with her lesson in wandless magic. The surge was powerful enough to interfere with the Ministry's monitoring equipment, Felix continued. They're sending a specialized team to investigate. Not Aurors, unspeakables. That can't be good. It isn't. Unspeakables don't get deployed unless something has the potential to violate fundamental magical laws. His gray eyes searched her face. Whatever Grandmama's planning, it's accelerating. Before Liz could respond, the ceiling of the great hall, which had been showing a pleasant autumn sky, abruptly changed. The magical enchantment rippled, distorted, and then revealed what appeared to be the inside of an ornate office. With a jolt, Liz recognized the headmaster's office, Dumbledore's office, though it now contained unfamiliar dark furniture and what looked disturbingly like a collection of shrunken heads on the desk. More shocking was the scene playing out within, Grandmama facing off against not just McGonagall and Professor Hawthorne, but 3 black-robed figures whose faces were obscured by strange, shimmering masks, unspeakables. The entire hall fell silent as they realized they were somehow seeing a real-time view of the confrontation. Cannot allow this to continue, one of the unspeakables was saying, voice distorted but audible. The integrity of the magical barriers is at risk. Barriers are meant to be crossed, Grandmama replied, looking thoroughly unconcerned despite being outnumbered. That's how exploration happens. That's how growth happens. This isn't about academic freedom, McGonagall interjected, looking torn between anger and concern. The magical fluctuations are affecting areas far beyond Hogwarts. The department has recorded disturbances as far away as Stonehenge and Avalon. Of course they have, Grandmama nodded cheerfully. The awakening is resonating with all the old power sites. Just as it should. Just as Dumbledore feared, Professor Hawthorne spoke up, his normally mild voice hardened with accusation. He didn't disappear to make way for you, Esmeralda. He left to find a way to stop what you're attempting. A murmur ran through the watching students. Liz exchanged a startled look with Felix. This contradicted everything Grandmama had told her about Dumbledore arranging his own absence. Is that what he told you? Grandmama's ancient face crinkled with what appeared to be genuine amusement. Oh, Archimedes, still so quick to believe what suits your preconceptions. Albus knew exactly what I would do. He counted on it. Enough games, the lead unspeakable cut in. By the authority of the Department of Mysteries, acting under emergency powers granted by the Minister for Magic, we are hereby removing you from the position of Headmistress and placing you in protective custody until the magical anomalies can be contained. Grandmama threw back her head and cackled, the sound echoing eerily through the great hall from the ceiling's projection. How many unspeakables did they send last time? 7. And the time before that, 12. Yet here I still am, uncontained. She spread her arms wide. But by all means, try again. It keeps life interesting. The 3 unspeakables raised their wands in unison. McGonagall stepped back, clearly unwilling to participate directly but not interfering. Professor Hawthorne, however, moved to stand beside the unspeakables, his own wand aimed at Grandmama. 4 against 1, Grandmama observed. Hardly sporting. But then, the Ministry never did care for fair play. What happened next occurred so quickly that many students would later disagree about the exact sequence of events. The unspeakables cast simultaneously, jets of silver light that should have immobilized even the most powerful witch. Hawthorne added his own spell, a binding charm of unusual complexity. Grandmama didn't move. Didn't draw a wand. She simply smiled, and the spells vanished. Not deflected or absorbed, but simply ceased to exist before reaching her. As I said, she sighed, sounding almost disappointed, hardly sporting. She clapped her hands once, and the office around them transformed. The walls became transparent, revealing not stone but what appeared to be living tissue, pulsing, organic material that made several students gag in revulsion. The floor rippled like a disturbed pond. What have you done? The lead unspeakable demanded, backing away from the transforming walls. I haven't done anything, Grandmama replied mildly. The castle is simply showing you its true nature. The nature Dumbledore began awakening, and I have continued. The organic walls pulsed faster, and tendrils of what looked like living stone extended toward the unspeakables, who cast frantic protective spells to no effect. The tendrils wrapped around their legs, holding them in place. Stop this immediately. McGonagall demanded, finally drawing her own wand. I'm not doing anything, Minerva, Grandmama insisted, still unnervingly calm. Hogwarts is making its own decisions now. As it was always meant to do. In the Great Hall, students watched in horrified fascination as the unspeakable struggled against the castle's hold. Professor Hawthorne, curiously, remained untouched by the tendrils, though he had backed against Dumbledore's desk. You know what she's doing, Hawthorne, the lead unspeakable called to him. Use the artifact. It's our only chance. Hawthorne's expression hardened. He reached into his robes and withdrew what appeared to be a small silver box, ornately engraved with symbols similar to those on the mysterious door beneath the castle. Grandmama's amused expression faltered for the first time. Where did you get that? From Dumbledore, Hawthorne replied grimly. Before he left. He suspected it might come to this. Albus wouldn't, Grandmama began, but Hawthorne had already opened the box. A blinding light erupted from within, so intense that students in the Great Hall cried out, shielding their eyes. When the light faded from the ceiling's projection, the scene had changed dramatically. The office had returned to normal. The unspeakable stood free of the tendrils, which had vanished. And Grandmama. Grandmama was contained within what appeared to be a cube of pure blue energy, her expression one of fury rather than amusement now. This is a mistake, Archimedes, she said, her voice distorted by the energy field. Dumbledore understood the necessity of the awakening. He knew what's coming. What's coming? McGonagall demanded. What does that mean? Hawthorne ignored the question, addressing Grandmama directly. Albus suspected you might believe that. It's why he left this failsafe with me, in case your methods proved too extreme. The children need to be prepared, Grandmama insisted, pressing gnarled hands against the energy barrier. The old powers need to be awakened and harnessed, or we won't stand a chance when the darkness reaches full strength. What darkness? McGonagall pressed. Esmeralda, if you know something about a coming threat, she's manipulating you, Professor, the lead unspeakable interrupted. This is typical Addams misdirection. Create chaos, then justify it with vague warnings about greater threats. In the Great Hall, Liz turned to Felix, her mind racing. She told me something was coming, something worse than Voldemort. She said Dumbledore knew and was preparing in his own way. But Hawthorne says Dumbledore left to stop her, Felix countered, looking troubled. They can't both be right. On the ceiling, the confrontation continued. We'll take her to the Ministry for Containment, the lead unspeakable was saying to McGonagall. Once she's properly secured, we can begin reversing the changes to the castle. That won't be as simple as you imagine, Grandmama called from her energy prison, her ancient face splitting into a grin despite her situation. Hogwarts has tasted freedom now. It remembers what it once was. What it was meant to be. As if in response to her words, the entire castle shuddered. In the Great Hall, tables rocked, silverware clattered, and the enchanted ceiling rippled again before returning to its normal view of the sky outside. What was that? Maya gasped, clutching the table. No one had time to answer before Professor Flitwick came running into the hall, his tiny legs pumping frantically. Everyone remain calm, he called in his squeaky voice. We're experiencing some magical fluctuations. Please proceed to your common rooms in an orderly fashion until further notice. Magical fluctuations? Felix muttered. That's one way to describe the castle having a seizure. Another, stronger tremor shook the hall, knocking several students from their benches. The walls groaned like a living thing in pain. Move, now. Flitwick ordered, all traces of his usual cheerfulness gone. Prefects, organize your houses. Quickly. As students scrambled to comply, Felix grabbed Liz's arm. This is it, whatever Grandmama was working toward. The awakening is happening, ready or not. But if she's contained, then it's proceeding without her guidance, Felix finished grimly. Which might be even worse. They joined the stream of students flowing toward the exits, but as they reached the entrance hall, another violent shake threw everyone off balance. Enormous cracks appeared in the stone floor, spreading like lightning bolts across the flagstones. Outside, someone shouted. Get outside before the castle collapses. Panic erupted. The orderly evacuation dissolved into chaos as students pushed toward the main doors, which swung open of their own accord, not to freedom, but to reveal an impenetrable darkness where the grounds should have been. Back! Get back! Felix shouted, pulling Liz away from the surging crowd. They pressed against the wall as others pushed forward, only to recoil from the strange void beyond the doors. The castle shook again, more violently than before. Chunks of stone fell from the ceiling, narrowly missing fleeing students. We need to find another way out, Liz said, scanning the entrance hall for alternatives. Or another way in, Felix countered, his eyes fixed on a point across the chaotic space. Following his gaze, Liz saw what he meant. A familiar metal door had appeared in the entrance hall wall, where no door had existed before. The door from the dungeons, covered in ancient symbols that now glowed with blinding intensity. The heart of Hogwarts, she breathed. It's calling us. Calling you, maybe. Felix looked grim but determined. You felt it before. You made a connection. Another section of ceiling crashed down, sending students screaming in all directions. The darkness beyond the main doors seemed to be seeping inward, tendrils of void extending into the entrance hall itself. We need to decide, Felix urged. Now. Liz looked from the mysterious door to the encroaching darkness, then back to Felix's face. We go in. Whatever's happening, the answers are through that door. Without waiting for his agreement, she pushed off from the wall, ducking and weaving through the panicking crowd toward the glowing door. Felix followed close behind, his wand drawn, though Liz suspected it would be useless against whatever they were facing. They reached the door just as another violent tremor rocked the castle. Liz placed her hand flat against the metal surface, feeling again that vast consciousness reaching out to her. But this time, the presence felt different, agitated, confused, almost desperate. "It's in pain," she realized aloud. "Whatever Hawthorne did to contain Grandmama, it's hurting the castle too." "Can you open it?" Felix asked, bracing himself against the wall as the floor buckled beneath them. Liz closed her eyes, remembering her lesson in wandless magic. "Don't try to force it. Just know it will open for you." She pressed her palm more firmly against the metal, feeling its warmth, its pulse syncing with her own heartbeat. "Let us in," she whispered. "We want to help." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a great indrawn breath, the symbols flared blindingly bright and the door swung open, revealing a pulsing tunnel of raw, living stone beyond. Without hesitation, Liz stepped through, Felix right beside her. The door swung shut behind them, cutting off the sounds of panic and destruction from the entrance hall. They stood in a corridor unlike any Liz had seen before in Hogwarts. The walls, floor, and ceiling appeared to be formed from a single piece of stone that glowed with an inner light, creating the unsettling impression of standing inside a massive, petrified artery. "Merlin's beard," Felix whispered, reaching out to touch the wall, which pulsed slightly beneath his fingers. "It really is alive." The corridor extended before them, gently sloping downward into the depths beneath the castle. With no other options, they began walking, the living stone illuminating their way with a soft, pulsing glow. "What did you mean when you said it was in pain?" Felix asked as they descended. "I could feel it, like a scream inside my head when I touched the door," Liz explained, struggling to put the sensation into words. "Whatever that artifact was that Hawthorne used, it's not just containing Grandmama. It's suppressing the castle's awakening, forcing it back into dormancy. Which it's fighting," Felix concluded, "hence the earthquakes and structural damage." "Exactly. It's like..." Liz searched for an analogy. "Like someone waking up from a centuries-long sleep, only to have anesthesia forced on them mid-awakening. The body fights it, thrashes, resists." They had reached a junction where the corridor split into 3 branches. Before they could debate which way to go, the left passage brightened, its pulsing becoming more rapid, almost urgent. "I think it's showing us the way," Liz said, turning left without hesitation. Felix followed, though his expression remained wary. "Convenient. Or it's hurting us exactly where it wants us. You're the one who wanted to find the heart of Hogwarts." "Yes, well, that was before the castle started having violent seizures and doorways began opening onto literal voids." Despite the dire situation, Liz felt a bubble of inappropriate laughter rise in her chest. "Having second thoughts about our little investigation, Blackwood?" Adjusting expectations, he corrected primly. "There's a difference between academic curiosity about ancient magical entities and being swallowed by a living castle during what appears to be a magical earthquake." The passage continued downward, the slope growing steeper. The walls pulsing increased in tempo, matching the urgency Liz felt building inside her own chest. "We're getting close to something," she said, picking up her pace. The corridor ended abruptly in a vast, spherical chamber that took Liz's breath away. The entire space pulsed with the same living stone, but here it was interwoven with veins of what looked like pure magical energy, glowing lines of blue, gold, green, and red that formed intricate patterns across the curved surfaces. In the center of the chamber floated a massive crystalline structure shaped roughly like a human heart, though easily the size of a small house. Within it, swirling colors shifted and changed, sometimes forming recognizable images: the Great Hall, the grounds, the Forbidden Forest, before dissolving back into abstract patterns. "The heart of Hogwarts," Felix breathed, his voice hushed with awe. The legends were true. The crystal heart pulsed in an irregular rhythm, each beat sending waves of energy through the veins along the walls. Liz could feel the wrongness of the pattern, like a heart in arrhythmia. It's dying, she realized with horror. Whatever Hawthorne did is killing it. As if in response to her words, the crystal structure shuddered violently, and the entire chamber trembled. Dust and small stones rained from the ceiling. If it dies, what happens to Hogwarts? Felix asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. The castle collapses. The magic fails. Liz moved closer to the crystal heart, drawn by an instinct she couldn't explain. All those students up there. Another violent pulse, another shower of debris from above. The heart's glow was dimming visibly now, the colors within growing muddy and dark. We need to do something, Liz said urgently. Grandmama was trying to fully awaken it, but now it's being forced back too quickly. The shock is too much. What can we possibly do? We're students, not ancient magical experts. Despite his protest, Felix moved to stand beside her, eyes fixed on the failing heart. Liz thought of her wandless magic lesson, intent and will, the foundation of the oldest magic. We need to stabilize it. Not awaken it fully, not force it back to sleep, but find a middle ground where it can recover. And how exactly do we do that? The same way Grandmama taught me to perform wandless magic. Liz held out her hand to him. Together. With clear intent. Felix looked at her outstretched hand, then at her face, indecision warring in his expression. The last time a Blackwood and an Addams proxy worked together on ancient magic, 3 villages disappeared, I know. But we're not them. Liz kept her hand extended, meeting his eyes steadily. And right now, it's this or be crushed when the castle collapses. Another violent pulse, stronger than before. A large chunk of ceiling crashed down just feet away from them. Well, when you put it that way, Felix muttered, taking her hand. What's the worst that could happen? Aside from dimensional displacement, temporal distortion, or complete molecular disintegration. That's the spirit. Liz squeezed his hand, then reached out her free hand toward the crystal heart. Follow my lead. Clear your mind and focus on a single intent, stabilization. Not control, not power, just balance. Felix nodded, extending his free hand alongside hers. Together, they focused on the failing heart, imagining its rhythm steadying, its glow strengthening, not to full, uncontrolled awakening, but to a sustainable level. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then Liz felt it, a tendril of awareness reaching out from the crystal, touching her consciousness just as it had when she'd first encountered the door. But this time, it touched Felix too, creating a 3-way connection. Images flooded her mind, Hogwarts as it had first been built, the founders channeling the ancient power that had always existed in this place. The castle growing, changing, developing its own awareness over centuries. Dumbledore, younger but recognizable, discovering the heart chamber and beginning careful work to gradually, safely reawaken what had been suppressed by his predecessors. Grandmama arriving, accelerating the process with less caution but genuine purpose, driven by knowledge of some coming threat. And Hawthorne, using Dumbledore's artifact to violently halt the awakening, not understanding the damage it would cause. Beside her, Felix gasped, presumably seeing the same visions. His grip on her hand tightened. It's showing us its history, he murmured. And its purpose. The heart pulsed again, but the rhythm was slightly steadier now, responding to their combined focus. The chamber trembled, but less violently than before. It's working, Liz whispered. Keep concentrating. They stood there, hands outstretched, minds focused on stability and balance, as the great heart gradually found a steadier rhythm. The colors within began to clarify again, the muddy darkness receding. The veins along the walls glowed more strongly, their patterns becoming more ordered. How long they remained in that position, Liz couldn't say. Time seemed meaningless in the heart chamber. But eventually, she became aware of voices and footsteps echoing down the corridor behind them. "In here, I'm certain of it," came Professor McGonagall's voice, tense with worry. "The focusing crystal should not be directly accessible to students," replied a voice Liz didn't recognize, probably one of the unspeakables. "This represents a catastrophic breach of containment protocols." The voices grew louder, and then McGonagall, Hawthorne, and two black-robed unspeakables burst into the chamber, wands drawn. They froze at the sight of Liz and Felix standing before the now steadily pulsing crystal heart, hands still outstretched. "Miss Thornfield. Mr. Blackwood." McGonagall's voice cracked with equal parts relief and anger. "Step away from that immediately." Neither Liz nor Felix moved. They couldn't. The connection with the heart held them in place, not forcibly but with the undeniable weight of purpose. "They've been enthralled," one of the unspeakables declared. "We need to break the connection before the entity fully manifests through them." "No," Liz managed to say, though speaking felt like pushing through treacle. "We're stabilizing it. It was dying. Dying." Hawthorne stepped forward, the silver box still clutched in one hand. "That's impossible. The Founder's focus can't be destroyed, only contained or released." "Not destroyed," Felix spoke with the same difficulty Liz had experienced. "Shocked. Your suppression was too violent, too sudden. It was like stopping a heart mid-beat." The heart pulsed, stronger now, and with each pulse, speaking became easier. "The castle is alive," Liz continued, finding her voice strengthening. "Really alive, not just enchanted. The Founders didn't create it, they formed a partnership with something that was already here. Something ancient." "Preposterous," the lead unspeakable scoffed. "The castle is a magical construct, nothing more." "Then why did your containment nearly destroy it?" Felix challenged. "Why is the entire structure still experiencing magical earthquakes?" As if to emphasize his point, the chamber shuddered again, though less violently than before. "Because Esmeralda Addams destabilized centuries of carefully maintained magical balances," Hawthorne retorted. "She's been awakening dormant systems throughout the castle, systems deliberately suppressed for the safety of everyone within." "Suppressed out of fear," Liz countered, echoing Grandmama's words. "Not because they were inherently dangerous, but because they couldn't be controlled." McGonagall looked from the students to the pulsing heart crystal, her expression troubled. "What exactly do you think you're doing right now?" "Finding a middle path," Felix explained. "Not full awakening, which would be too much too fast, but not complete suppression either, which was killing it. A stabilized state where the castle can exist as it was truly meant to, semi-awake, responsive, but not chaotic." "And you determined this advanced magical theory yourselves, did you?" McGonagall asked dryly. "No," Liz admitted. "The castle showed us. It can communicate, share memories, intentions. It doesn't want to harm anyone. It just wants to be what it was meant to be." The unspeakables exchanged glances. The lead one stepped forward. "Remove yourselves from contact with the focus immediately. This is not a request. If we break the connection now, the destabilization will resume," Felix warned. "We haven't finished the balancing process." "That is not your concern or responsibility," the unspeakable insisted. "The Department of Mysteries has protocols for containing and managing entities of this nature. The same protocols that were just failing catastrophically upstairs." Liz challenged. "The castle is rejecting your containment methods. It needs a cooperative approach, not suppression." Hawthorne's expression hardened. "Enough of this." He raised the silver box. "The artifact will neutralize any external influences on the focus." "No." Both Liz and Felix shouted in unison, but it was too late. Hawthorne opened the box, releasing that same blinding light they had seen in the vision of Grandmama's capture. But this time, instead of creating an energy prison, the light shot directly toward the crystal heart, and rebounded. The backlash threw Hawthorne across the chamber, slamming him into the wall with enough force to crack the living stone. The silver box flew from his hand, skittering across the floor. The heart crystal pulsed triumphantly, its glow intensifying. "Impossible," gasped the second unspeakable, rushing to Hawthorne's crumpled form. "The artifact cannot fail against the focus. It was created specifically to control it." "It's not failing," Liz realized, feeling the heart's intentions through their connection. "It's being reintegrated. The artifact was created from a piece of the focus itself, a failsafe the founders created in case the awakening proceeded too quickly. But now that we've stabilized the heart," Felix continued, understanding dawning, "it's reclaiming that piece. Becoming whole again." The silver box began to glow with the same light as the crystal heart, levitating from the floor and floating toward the massive structure. As they all watched, it melted into a stream of pure energy that flowed into the heart, making it pulse even more strongly. The veins along the walls brightened, the patterns becoming more complex and beautiful. "What have you done?" the lead unspeakable demanded, backing away from the increasingly radiant crystal. "We haven't done anything," Liz replied calmly. "The castle is healing itself. Finding its balance." As if in response to her words, the tremors throughout the chamber ceased completely. The heart's pulse stabilized into a strong, steady rhythm. The connection between it and the two students gentled, becoming a warm acknowledgement rather than an urgent need. "I think we can let go now," Liz said to Felix, who nodded. Together, they lowered their hands, the connection with the heart fading to a gentle background awareness rather than the all-consuming link it had been. They stepped back, both swaying slightly with exhaustion. McGonagall moved forward quickly to steady them. "Are you both all right?" "Tired," Felix admitted. "But otherwise fine." "The castle?" Liz asked anxiously. "The students?" "The tremors have stopped throughout the structure," McGonagall confirmed. "The strange darkness at the entrances has receded. Whatever you did seems to have stabilized things." The lead unspeakable was examining the heart crystal with some kind of magical instrument, his expression hidden behind his mask but his body language suggesting confused frustration. "The readings are unprecedented," he muttered to his colleague. "The focus is active but contained, awake but controlled. It's maintaining its own boundaries." "Where's Grandmama?" Liz asked suddenly, realizing the ancient witch was conspicuously absent. McGonagall and Hawthorne, who was being helped to his feet by the second unspeakable, exchanged glances. When the artifact failed, the containment field around Madame Addams also failed, McGonagall explained carefully. "She departed." "Escaped, you mean," Hawthorne corrected bitterly, holding his side where he'd impacted the wall. "And without the artifact, we have no way to contain her if she returns." "I don't think she's coming back," Felix said unexpectedly. "At least not right away." "And how would you know that, Mr. Blackwood?" McGonagall asked sharply. Felix glanced at Liz before answering. "Because her work here is done. The castle is awake, not chaotically, destructively awake as it was becoming, but consciously, controllably awake. Which I suspect was her real goal all along. Along with teaching those receptive to the older magics," Liz added quietly, thinking of her midnight lesson. The heart crystal pulsed, as if in agreement. "This situation is unprecedented," the lead unspeakable declared, putting away his instrument. "The department will need to establish new protocols for monitoring and studying this development. In the meantime," McGonagall interjected firmly, "these students need medical attention and rest. Whatever they've done appears to have prevented a catastrophe, but they're still children in my care." "We're 16, Liz pointed out, somewhat unhelpfully. "And we know more about what's happening than they do," Felix added, nodding toward the unspeakables. "Nevertheless," McGonagall's tone brooked no argument, "you will both accompany me to the hospital wing immediately. We can discuss your unprecedented and highly irregular magical experiment after Madame Pomfrey has cleared you." The walk back through the living stone corridor was significantly less dramatic than their descent had been. The passage no longer sloped steeply but seemed to have reconfigured itself into a gentle incline. The pulsing glow was steady and calming rather than urgent. When they reached the door that had first admitted them, it opened onto the entrance hall, now restored to order, with no sign of the panic and destruction they had left behind. Students moved about normally, though many were still discussing the strange events in excited whispers. "The house elves have prepared a special dinner for everyone," McGonagall informed them as they crossed the entrance hall. "After the excitement of the day, a good meal seems in order." "What will you tell everyone?" Liz asked, suddenly realizing the enormity of explaining what had happened. McGonagall's lips thinned. "For now, that we experienced some magical fluctuations which have been successfully stabilized. The full truth is complicated, and not entirely clear even to those of us who witnessed it." "The castle is alive," Felix said simply. "That seems clear enough." "Yes, well," McGonagall sighed, "there's a difference between something being true and something being wise to announce to hundreds of impressionable magical children who are already dealing with animated staircases and carnivorous classroom furniture." She had a point. Liz imagined trying to explain the vast, ancient consciousness they'd connected with to someone like the Thornhill twins, who would immediately try to convince it to help them pull elaborate pranks. In the hospital wing, Madame Pomfrey fussed over them both, finding nothing physically wrong but insisting they drink several potions to restore magical equilibrium and prevent neural feedback. "You connected directly to a magical nexus point," she scolded as she force-fed Liz a particularly foul-tasting green concoction. "You're lucky your minds weren't completely overwhelmed." "The castle wouldn't have hurt us," Liz insisted between grimaces at the potion's taste. "It was asking for help." "Magical entities don't ask for anything, dear," Pomfrey replied skeptically. "They influence, manipulate, and enthrall. You're fortunate Professor McGonagall found you when she did." Rather than argue, Liz exchanged a knowing look with Felix in the next bed. They knew what they had experienced, a genuine connection, not manipulation. The castle had shared its history, its pain, and its purpose with them. That wasn't enthrallment, it was communication. After Pomfrey had finally declared them stable enough to leave, though under strict instructions to return immediately if they experienced dimensional dissonance, temporal echoes, or spontaneous transmutation, they found Professor McGonagall waiting for them in the corridor outside. "The unspeakables have returned to the ministry to report," she informed them, leading them toward her office rather than the great hall where dinner would be underway. "Professor Hawthorne is assisting them with containment theories, though without Dumbledore's artifact, their options are limited." "The castle doesn't need containing now," Liz said. "It's balanced. It won't hurt anyone unless threatened." "So you keep saying," McGonagall replied, not unkindly. "But you'll forgive those of us with more experience in magical catastrophes for wanting additional safeguards." In her office, she directed them to chairs before her desk and, to Liz's surprise, produced a plate of sandwiches and a pot of tea from a side cabinet. "I thought you might prefer a quieter meal after your adventure," she explained, pouring 3 cups of tea with brisk efficiency. "And I have some questions that would be better asked away from curious ears." Liz and Felix exchanged glances again. McGonagall might present a stern exterior, but she had always been fair. And right now, she seemed more concerned than angry. "What would you like to know, Professor?" Felix asked, accepting a cup of tea. McGonagall settled behind her desk, studying them both over her square spectacles. "Let's start with how you found the heart chamber in the first place." "That location has been hidden for centuries, accessible only to the headmaster or headmistress, and even then, only under specific conditions." So they explained, about the mysterious door that had first appeared in the dungeons, about Grandmama showing it to Liz, about their investigations and growing concern over the changes in the castle. McGonagall listened without interruption, though her expression grew increasingly troubled. "And these private lessons with Madame Addams," she said when they had finished, focusing on Liz. "What exactly did she teach you?" Liz hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Wandless magic, mostly. And a different way of thinking about magic, not as something to be controlled through specific techniques, but as something that responds to intent and will. Addams family magic, McGonagall identified it immediately. Ancient, powerful, and notoriously unpredictable. But effective, Liz couldn't help adding. It works, Professor. Many dangerous things work, Miss Thornfield. That doesn't make them wise to pursue. McGonagall sighed deeply. I had hoped to shield students from the more extreme aspects of Esmeralda's methods, but it seems I failed in at least 2 cases. With all due respect, Professor, Felix spoke up, if Liz hadn't learned what she did from Grandmama, we wouldn't have been able to stabilize the heart. The castle might have collapsed entirely. A problem that wouldn't have existed if Esmeralda hadn't been awakening the castle in the first place, McGonagall pointed out dryly. But she was right about one thing, Liz said, remembering the visions the heart had shared. Dumbledore had already started the process. He just was doing it much more gradually. McGonagall's expression softened slightly. Yes, that does sound like Albus. Always the long game, the careful preparation. She set down her teacup. Which brings me to my next question. Did Madame Addams say anything about where Dumbledore might have gone? Or why? Liz and Felix exchanged another look. She said he was preparing for something, Liz answered carefully. Some kind of darkness or threat that would require the old powers to combat. She implied he had arranged his own disappearance and her appointment. While Hawthorne claims Dumbledore left to find a way to stop Grandmama, Felix added. They can't both be right. Unless, McGonagall mused, Albus was playing a more complex game than either of them realized. She stared into her tea for a moment, then looked up sharply. Did either of you notice anything unusual about Professor Hawthorne before today's events? The sudden change of subject caught Liz off guard. Unusual how? His classes were completely normal, Felix replied, repeating their earlier observation. No chaos, no animated furniture, no curriculum changes. Almost as if he were immune to Grandmama's influence, Liz finished. Or protected somehow. Indeed. McGonagall's expression gave nothing away. Most curious, given that every other aspect of the castle was affected by Madame Addams's adjustments. The implication hung in the air between them. Hawthorne was somehow different, possibly not what he appeared to be. There's something else, Liz said, remembering a detail from the vision in the Great Hall. When the unspeakables confronted Grandmama, they called him Archimedes. Is that his first name? Professor Hawthorne's credentials list his name as Archimedes Hawthorne, yes, McGonagall confirmed. Though I confess I know little else about him. Dumbledore arranged his appointment personally, shortly before his departure. Another piece of the puzzle, though Liz wasn't sure how it fit yet. Dumbledore had placed Hawthorne at Hogwarts deliberately, equipped with an artifact that could contain both Grandmama and the castle's awakening. One final question, McGonagall said, setting down her teacup with finality. Do either of you have any idea where Madame Addams might have gone after her containment failed? No, they answered in unison. But, Felix added, if I had to guess, she's continuing whatever preparations she thinks are necessary for this coming threat she keeps warning about. Which means she'll likely return when she believes the time is right, McGonagall concluded grimly. Professor, Liz asked, unable to contain her curiosity any longer, do you believe her? About some coming darkness that requires the old powers to fight? McGonagall was silent for a long moment, considering her answer. I believe, she said finally, that Esmeralda Addams genuinely believes in such a threat. Whether it exists as she perceives it is another matter entirely. The Addams family has a unique perspective on what constitutes danger. But you're not dismissing it entirely, Felix noted shrewdly. After recent events, Mr. Blackwood, I find myself reluctant to dismiss anything entirely. McGonagall rose, signaling the end of their conversation. Now, I suggest you both return to your dormitories and get some rest. The past 24 hours have been extraordinary, but tomorrow classes will resume as normal. Or as normal as possible with portions of the castle now demonstrably sentient. As they stood to leave, McGonagall added, I trust one don't need to emphasize the importance of discretion regarding the details of today's events. The last thing we need is widespread panic about living hearts beneath the castle. Of course, Professor, Liz agreed. We won't tell anyone. Though she wondered how long such information could remain secret in a school full of curious magical teenagers. Excellent. And Miss Thornfield? McGonagall fixed her with a penetrating stare. I would advise caution regarding any techniques Madam Addams may have taught you. The older magics are not inherently dark, but they can be unpredictable in inexperienced hands. Yes, Professor, Liz replied, though she had no intention of abandoning what she'd learned. The wandless magic, the connection to intent rather than rigid technique, these felt right in a way regular magic lessons never had. As they left McGonagall's office, Felix nudged Liz's shoulder with his own. So, stabilized a living castle, connected with an ancient magical entity, and helped a notorious chaos which escaped ministry custody. Not bad for a Wednesday. Despite her exhaustion, Liz laughed. When you put it that way, it sounds almost impressive. Almost? Thornfield, we just made magical history. The unspeakables were completely blindsided by what we did. What we did, Liz echoed, suddenly serious. We did it together, Felix. A Blackwood and a, whatever I am. A Thornfield with an unexpected talent for Addams-style magic, he supplied, then added more quietly, and I'm glad it was you. I don't think anyone else would have felt what the castle needed. The unexpected praise warmed her more than it should have. So does this mean we're friends now, not just investigative partners? Felix appeared to consider this gravely. I suppose surviving near death by castle collapse does create a certain bond. Though if anyone in Slytherin asks, I'll deny it completely and claim I was using you for your superior knowledge of ancient magical entities. Of course, Liz nodded solemnly. And if any Ravenclaws ask, I'll say I was merely tolerating your presence because of your family's useful dark arts library. Glad we understand each other. He hesitated at the point where they would need to part ways, he to the dungeons, she to Ravenclaw Tower. Tomorrow at breakfast. We should compare notes on any residual effects. Residual effects. Felix tapped his temple. The connection with the heart. I can still feel it, like a background hum. Can't you? Now that he mentioned it, Liz could sense it too, a gentle awareness at the edge of her consciousness, like knowing someone was in the room with you without looking directly at them. Yes, she admitted. I thought it was just exhaustion or after-effects of Pomfrey's potions. I think it's something more permanent, Felix said. But we can talk about it tomorrow. Right now, I need about 12 hours of sleep and possibly a dreamless sleep potion. Same, Liz agreed, suddenly aware of just how bone-tired she was. Good night, Felix. Good night, Liz. He turned to go, then paused. One more thing. Yes. I still think this is potentially a terrible idea that could end with us in alternate dimensions or worse, he said seriously, but I'm glad we did it. Whatever happens next. I'm in. With that strangely formal declaration, he headed toward the dungeon stairs, leaving Liz to make her way up to Ravenclaw Tower alone with her thoughts. The castle felt different now, not chaotic as it had under Grandmama's initial influence, but awake in a way it hadn't been before. The staircases still moved, but with purpose rather than mischief. The portraits watched her pass with new awareness in their painted eyes. Even the stone beneath her feet seemed to respond subtly to her passage, warming slightly where she stepped. Hogwarts was alive, truly, consciously alive, and somehow, she and Felix had helped it find a balance between dormancy and chaos. Whatever came next, whatever threat Grandmama and possibly Dumbledore were preparing for, at least the castle itself would be ready. And so, Liz decided as she finally reached her dormitory, would she? Chapter 3, the heart of Hogwarts 3 weeks after the stabilization incident, as students had taken to calling it, life at Hogwarts had settled into a new normal that was anything but. Liz woke to her bedroom ceiling showing a perfect replica of the night sky, complete with shooting stars that occasionally dipped low enough to ruffle her hair. The dormitory walls had developed a habit of changing color to match students' moods, currently shifting between a soft blue, Maya's contentment as she slept, and an anxious purple, matching Liz's own uncertainty about the Transfiguration exam later that day. Morning, castle, she murmured, a habit she'd developed since their connection in the heart chamber. The floor warmed slightly beneath her feet in response, the castle's equivalent of a friendly greeting. These subtle communications had become commonplace since the stabilization, though Liz and Felix seemed to be the only students who noticed them. The rest of Hogwarts had adapted to their semi-sentient school with remarkable resilience. Staircases still moved, but now responded to polite requests to hold still. Classroom furniture remained animated but had developed something resembling manners, desk drawers would ask before opening, and chairs pulled themselves out when students approached. Even the suits of armor had settled their labor dispute after being granted weekly polishing and the right to perform choreographed musical numbers on special occasions. McGonagall had taken over as acting headmistress in Grandmama's absence, working tirelessly to blend traditional education with the castle's new awareness. The official story remained magical fluctuations that had been successfully stabilized, though rumors of what really happened grew more elaborate by the day. "Did you finish Flitwick's essay?" Maya asked, emerging from her bed as the ceiling transitioned to a sunrise specifically for her, another of the castle's personalized touches. "Mostly. Just need to add the conclusion." Liz pulled on her robes, which straightened their own wrinkles. "You were up late again with Blackwood, weren't you?" There was no accusation in Maya's tone, just resigned acceptance. "Research," Liz explained, "not for the first time. We're trying to decode those symbols from the heart chamber." What she didn't mention was the real reason for their nightly sessions in the room of requirement, which had become alarmingly eager to please, sometimes adding features before they were even requested. She and Felix were continuing the wandless magic training Grandmama had begun, using what they remembered from their connection with the castle's heart to guide them. The background awareness of the castle remained constant for them both, a gentle presence at the edge of consciousness that occasionally sharpened when something significant was happening somewhere in the grounds. Last week, it had alerted them to a first year who'd accidentally wandered into the Forbidden Forest, allowing them to alert Hagrid before anything terrible happened. "You know everyone thinks you're dating, right?" Maya added casually, brushing her hair with a brush that had finally stopped trying to crawl away. Liz nearly dropped her wand. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Secret midnight meetings, meaningful glances across the Great Hall, saving the castle together through magical connection, very romantic stuff, Thornfield. "We're partners in a complex magical investigation," Liz protested, ignoring the warmth creeping up her neck. "Nothing romantic about it." Maya just smiled knowingly as they headed down to breakfast. The Great Hall ceiling, once simply reflecting the outside weather, now displayed elaborate scenes that seemed to respond to the collective mood of the student body. Today it showed fluffy clouds racing playfully across a bright blue sky, occasionally forming shapes that made the first years point and giggle. Liz scanned the Slytherin table automatically, spotting Felix in his usual spot. He glanced up at the same moment, as if sensing her arrival. They discovered another side effect of their connection to the heart, a faint awareness of each other's presence and general emotional state. Useful for coordination, mortifying when one of them was upset or embarrassed. Like now, when his slight smirk told her he'd picked up on her flustered reaction to Maya's teasing. She deliberately looked away, focusing on her breakfast as the Thornhill twins slid into seats nearby. "Big news," Finn announced, leaning forward conspiratorially. Heard McGonagall talking to Flitwick outside the staff room. "Ministry's sending another delegation today." "After what happened to the last one?" Liz raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Different department this time," Rowan explained. "Something about temporal anomalies detected around the castle." Liz's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Temporal anomalies. Like what? No idea, Finn shrugged. But they mentioned the Department of Mysteries again. Unspeakables returning to Hogwarts couldn't be good news. Liz caught Felix's eye across the hall, giving a slight nod toward the entrance. He nodded back, understanding the silent request to meet outside. Gotta check something before class, she told Maya, grabbing a piece of toast as she stood. In the entrance hall, Felix was already waiting, leaning against a column with casual grace that Liz found irrationally annoying. Temporal anomalies, he said without preamble. That can't be coincidence. You think it's connected to what Grandmama was warning about? Liz asked, stepping closer to keep their conversation private. Has to be. Remember what she said about preparing for some coming darkness? What if it's not coming from somewhere else, but someone else? Liz considered this. Time magic is heavily restricted. Even time turners can only go back hours, not years. In standard magical practice, yes, Felix agreed. But we've seen firsthand that standard practices have limitations. Before they could discuss further, the entrance doors swung open, revealing a group of official-looking wizards led by Professor McGonagall. Unlike the previous ministry delegation, these individuals wore robes of a deep midnight blue embroidered with tiny silver symbols that seemed to shift and move, Department of Mysteries specialists. Remember, complete transparency is our policy, McGonagall was saying as they entered. The castle's evolution represents unprecedented magical phenomena that we're still understanding ourselves. The lead unspeakable, a tall witch with silver streaks in her dark hair, nodded curtly. We appreciate your cooperation, Professor McGonagall. Our measurements indicate the temporal disturbances are centered in the lower levels. Liz and Felix exchanged alarmed looks. The lower levels, where the heart chamber was located. McGonagall spotted them hovering near the staircase. Ah, Miss Thornfield, Mr. Blackwood. Perfect timing. These ministry specialists have questions about the incident 3 weeks ago. Perhaps you could assist by sharing your unique perspective. It wasn't really a request. Liz approached reluctantly, Felix close behind. These are the students, the lead unspeakable asked, studying them with unsettling intensity. The ones who stabilized the focus. We helped the castle find balance, Liz corrected carefully. It wasn't just us. Fascinating. The witch circled them slowly, holding what appeared to be a small silver instrument that emitted soft pulses of light when pointed at them. They're still connected to it. Resonance signatures are unmistakable. Connected how? Asked a younger wizard in the group, furiously taking notes on a pad that floated beside him. Sympathetic magical attunement, replied the witch. Their magical signatures have been partially synchronized with the castle's core magical frequency. Felix stepped closer to Liz, his shoulder brushing hers. We're right here, you know. You could just ask us. The witch smiled thinly. Of course. I'm Unspeakable Crane. We're investigating temporal anomalies centered around Hogwarts that began approximately 3 weeks ago. Around the time of the stabilization, Liz noted. Precisely. Our instruments detect time-space fluctuations emanating from beneath the castle, specifically, from what you call the heart chamber. Crane's piercing gaze fixed on Liz. We need to examine this chamber immediately. I'm afraid that won't be possible, McGonagall interjected smoothly. The castle has reconfigured access to certain areas since the incident. The heart chamber can only be reached when the castle itself permits it. This was technically true. The door to the heart chamber had vanished after Liz and Felix had stabilized the crystal heart, reappearing only twice since then, seemingly when the castle wanted to show them something important. Then perhaps these students, with their special connection, could persuade it, Crane suggested with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We can try, Felix offered, surprising Liz with his cooperation. But the castle has its own will now. It doesn't always listen. Crane nodded. Then let's not waste time. The temporal fluctuations are increasing in frequency and magnitude. If our calculations are correct, we have less than 48 hours before a critical threshold is reached. Critical threshold for what? Liz asked, a chill running down her spine. That, Crane replied ominously, is precisely what we're here to determine. The dungeons had changed dramatically since the stabilization. The once damp, gloomy corridors now glowed with a soft, amber light emanating from the stones themselves. The air was fresher, carrying hints of earth and growing things rather than mold and potion fumes. As they descended deeper, led by Felix who knew the dungeon layout best, the castle's presence in Liz's mind grew stronger. It was aware of their search, curious about their purpose. It knows we're looking for the heart chamber, she said quietly to Felix. Can you ask it to show us the way? He replied, equally soft. Liz concentrated on the gentle awareness in her mind, focusing her intent on finding the door again. We need to understand what's happening, she thought toward the presence. These people are concerned about time disturbances. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a ripple of what felt like alarm flowed through the connection, followed by a sense of urgent purpose. Around the next corner, the familiar metal door appeared in the wall, symbols glowing softly. There, Liz pointed. The castles opened the way. Crane moved forward eagerly, her team of unspeakables producing various instruments that whirred and pulsed as they approached the door. Extraordinary, murmured the note-taking wizard. The temporal distortion increases exponentially near the entrance. These readings suggest the space beyond exists partially outside normal time flow. Can you open it? Crane asked, turning to Liz and Felix. Felix placed his hand on the metal surface first. It's different. Something's changed. Liz joined him, placing her palm beside his. The sensation was indeed different, the metal felt not just warm but almost vibrating with energy, and the consciousness beyond seemed agitated, urgent. It wants to show us something, she said, certainty filling her. But I don't think it wants all of us. Crane frowned. That's not acceptable. This investigation isn't up to you, Felix interrupted coolly. The castle decides who enters. Unless you'd prefer another catastrophic magical backlash like what happened when Professor Hawthorne tried to force his way in. McGonagall stepped forward. Perhaps a compromise. Miss Thornfield and Mr. Blackwood enter first, establish contact with the heart, and then determine if it's safe for the specialists to follow. After a tense negotiation, Crane reluctantly agreed, though she insisted on equipping Liz and Felix with small silver devices that would record what they encountered. These are temporal monitors, she explained, fastening one to Liz's wrist like a watch. They'll measure and record any time-space distortions you encounter. Do not remove them under any circumstances. When they were ready, Liz and Felix placed their hands on the door again, focusing their intent together. The symbols flared brightly, and the door swung open to reveal not the corridor of living stone they expected, but a swirling vortex of misty light. That's definitely new, Felix muttered. The readings are off the scale, one of the unspeakables exclaimed, checking an instrument. This is a Class 5 temporal distortion field. Liz felt the castle's urgency through their connection. It wants us to hurry. Be careful, McGonagall warned. If anything seems dangerous, we'll turn back, Liz promised, though they both knew it might not be that simple. With a deep breath, she stepped into the swirling light, Felix right beside her. The sensation was disorienting, like stepping through a waterfall of time itself, moments washing over their skin as they passed through. When their vision cleared, they found themselves in the heart chamber, but not as they'd left it. The spherical room was the same, but the massive crystal heart at its center had changed dramatically. Now it pulsed not just with light but with images, hundreds of them, playing across its faceted surface like windows into other times and places. The veins of energy along the walls pulsed frantically, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with temporal distortion. Merlin's beard, Felix breathed, staring at the heart. It's showing us everything. Liz moved closer, mesmerized by the rapid succession of images. She saw Hogwarts as it was being built, the four founders channeling magic into the foundation stones. She saw battles fought on the grounds over centuries, students coming and going through generations. And most disturbingly, she saw darkness, a creeping shadow that appeared in multiple time frames, growing stronger, more defined with each appearance. It's trying to warn us, she realized, the castle's emotions flooding her mind with increasing urgency. Something is breaking through from another time, another reality. Felix joined her, his eyes fixed on the crystal heart. Not breaking through. Coming back. Look. He pointed to one facet where the images moved more slowly. Liz could make out a familiar figure, Dumbledore, but looking haggard and exhausted, working complex magic in what appeared to be a cave filled with ancient runes. He didn't disappear, Felix said softly. He went somewhere, somewhen, to investigate this threat. As if responding to their understanding, the heart crystal pulsed brighter, and the images coalesced into a single, larger vision. They saw Dumbledore confronting what appeared to be a tear in reality itself, a jagged black rift hovering in midair, pulsing with malevolent energy. Through the rift, shadowy figures moved, reaching toward the opening with elongated limbs that seemed to bend in impossible ways. The Nameless Ones, a voice said behind them. Liz and Felix spun around to find Professor Hawthorne standing at the entrance to the chamber, his normally mild expression replaced with grim determination. How did you, Liz began. The castle permitted me entry, he said simply, approaching the crystal heart with reverence. It knows time grows short. You know what those things are, Felix accused. The shadows trying to break through. Hawthorne nodded solemnly. They have many names in different magical traditions. The Nameless Ones. The Void Dwellers. The Forgotten Gods. They exist in the spaces between realities, eternally hungry for magic and life. And they're trying to break into our world, Liz guessed, watching the shadowy figures claw at the rift in Dumbledore's vision. They've been trying for millennia, Hawthorne confirmed. The founders built Hogwarts over a natural thin point between dimensions, not just as a school, but as a ward stone, a protection against incursion. That's why the heart is here, Felix realized. It's been holding them back all this time. Yes. The castle's awareness, its magic, forms a barrier they cannot easily penetrate. Hawthorne moved closer to the crystal, studying the images with knowing eyes. Every few centuries, the barrier weakens naturally. In the past, the headmaster or headmistress would perform the renewal, a ritual strengthening of the wards using the castle's heart. But Dumbledore disappeared before he could do this, Liz said, pieces clicking together. That's why Grandmama came, to prepare the castle for renewal. Not exactly, Hawthorne's expression darkened. Dumbledore discovered something disturbing, this particular weakening is different. Stronger. Deliberately accelerated by forces on the other side. The heart crystal pulsed in agreement, the images shifting to show Dumbledore examining ancient texts, his face growing more concerned with each page he turned. The Nameless Ones found a way to erode the barrier faster than ever before, Hawthorne continued. Dumbledore realized the traditional renewal wouldn't be enough this time. He needed to find another solution. So he left to research alternatives, Felix concluded. And brought Grandmama here because the Addams family knows more about dimensional boundaries than any other magical lineage, Hawthorne finished. They've been walking between worlds for generations. Liz frowned, connecting dots. But you tried to stop her. You had Dumbledore's artifact to contain her. A flash of what might have been guilt crossed Hawthorne's face. I misunderstood. When Albus left, he gave me specific instructions, monitor Esmeralda's progress, and if the castle began destabilizing too quickly, use the artifact to slow the process. Not stop it entirely, just moderate it. But you tried to shut it down completely, Felix accused. Because I believed the castle's transformation was the problem, not part of the solution. Hawthorne sighed heavily. I was wrong. Esmeralda was right about the awakening being necessary, just not in the chaotic manner she was implementing it. The crystal heart pulsed again, the images shifting to show the current state of the barrier, a shimmering veil of magic stretched dangerously thin, with dark shapes pressing against it from the other side. Cracks were forming, widening with each pulse. How long do we have? Liz asked, throat dry with fear. Less than a day now, Hawthorne replied grimly. The unspeakable's calculations were optimistic. The barrier is failing faster than anyone anticipated. Then we need to perform this renewal ritual, Felix said decisively. Right now. It's not that simple, Hawthorne shook his head. The traditional ritual requires the full circle of Hogwarts leadership, headmaster or headmistress, for heads of houses, and critically, someone with blood connection to the founders. Which we don't have, Liz realized. Unless Dumbledore returns with an alternative solution, Hawthorne confirmed. Which, based on these visions, he's been working on. The crystal showed Dumbledore again, this time completing some kind of ritual circle in the cave, ancient runes glowing around him as he prepared for something. He's trying to come back, Felix realized. But something's wrong. Look. The images showed Dumbledore's ritual faltering, the runes flickering as shadow tendrils snaked into his workspace, disrupting his magic. He was trapped, caught between realities, unable to complete his return. The nameless ones are blocking him, Hawthorne confirmed grimly. They know he's found something that could stop them. Liz felt a wave of determination from the castle itself, pulsing through their connection. The castle thinks we can help. That's why it showed us this. But how? Felix asked. We're just students. We don't know how to perform dimensional magic or ancient rituals. No, agreed Hawthorne, but you have something equally valuable, a direct connection to the heart of Hogwarts. A connection even I, as Dumbledore's agent, don't possess. The crystal heart pulsed brighter, and suddenly Liz understood. It wants to use our connection as a bridge. To reach out to Dumbledore and help him break through. That's incredibly dangerous, Hawthorne warned. Extending your consciousness across dimensional boundaries could shatter your minds. Do we have a choice? Felix challenged. If the barrier falls completely, these nameless ones get through, and then what? Then everything ends, said a familiar, croaking voice from the chamber entrance. All magic, all life, consumed by endless hunger. They turned to find Grandmama Addams standing there, looking exactly as she had when she disappeared 3 weeks ago, though perhaps with a few more unusual stains on her ancient black dress. Esmeralda, Hawthorne acknowledged stiffly. You've returned. Obviously, she cackled, striding into the chamber with surprising energy for someone her age. Did you think I'd miss the end of the world? What kind of hostess would that make me? Despite the dire situation, Liz felt a surge of relief at seeing the eccentric old witch again. You knew this was coming all along. Of course, child. Why else would I have spent weeks teaching you to access the older magics? Grandmama patted her cheek affectionately. Though you and young Mr. Blackwood have made remarkable progress on your own. I could feel your wandless practice even from the nether realms. Felix shifted uncomfortably. You've been watching us. Monitoring, Grandmama corrected cheerfully. The Addams family has a natural talent for interdimensional surveillance. How do you think we always know when relatives die? The screaming usually gives it away. Enough, Hawthorne interrupted. Esmeralda, the barrier is failing. We need to find a way to help Albus return with his solution. Grandmama's ancient face grew serious, a transformation so stark it was almost more frightening than the dimensional threat. Yes, I can see that. Albus has found the sealing ritual of Morgana, clever man. It would indeed work, if he could return to perform it. She studied the crystal heart thoughtfully. The children's connection to the heart could indeed serve as an anchor point. We'll do it, Liz said immediately, Felix nodding in agreement beside her. Brave little fools, Grandmama said, but with obvious approval. Very well. But we'll need more power than just your connection. We need the full awakening of the castle, something I was working toward before I was so rudely imprisoned in a magical bubble. She shot Hawthorne a pointed look. The full awakening could destabilize the entire structure, he protested. Only if done carelessly, Grandmama countered. With proper guidance and the castle's cooperation, it can be controlled. She turned to Liz and Felix. That's where you two come in. The castle trusts you. It will follow your lead during the awakening. The crystal heart pulsed, ripples of what felt like agreement flowing through their mental connection. What do we need to do? Liz asked, determination overriding fear. Grandmama's face split into her terrifying grin. Something tremendously dangerous and incredibly fun. We're going to temporarily merge your consciousnesses with the heart itself, creating a bridge strong enough for Albus to cross back to our reality. That sounds. Felix began. Potentially fatal, yes, Grandmama finished cheerfully. But what's life without a little mortal peril? Besides, you're both young and resilient. Your minds should mostly recover. Eventually. Esmeralda. Hawthorne objected. Oh, don't be such a worrywart, Archimedes. They'll be fine. She leaned closer to the students and stage whispered, probably. The heart crystal pulsed urgently, the images of the failing barrier showing shadows pressing more insistently against the thinning veil. We're running out of time, Liz noted, squaring her shoulders. Let's do it. That's the spirit. Grandmama clapped her gnarled hands together. Archimedes, be a dear and inform Minerva what's happening. We'll need the other heads of houses here to stabilize the ritual once Albus returns. Hawthorne hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave them alone with Grandmama. Go, Felix urged. If this fails, someone needs to prepare the school's defenses for what comes next. With a grim nod, Hawthorne departed, leaving them alone with Grandmama and the pulsing heart. Now then, she said, rubbing her hands together with disturbing eagerness, let's wake up this castle properly, shall we? Outside the heart chamber, chaos was spreading throughout Hogwarts. Temporal disturbances rippled across the grounds, windows showing glimpses of the past or possible futures, staircases leading to versions of corridors from decades ago, ghosts multiplying as they intersected with their own timelines. In the entrance hall, Unspeakable Crane and her team worked frantically to contain the anomalies, their instruments whirring and flashing as reality fluctuated around them. The distortions are accelerating, Crane reported as McGonagall and Hawthorne approached. We're detecting multiple dimensional incursions throughout the lower levels. Not incursions yet, Hawthorne corrected grimly. Just thinning. The actual breaches haven't begun. Breaches? McGonagall's normally composed expression faltered. Explain, immediately. As Hawthorne outlined the situation, the Unspeakables listened with growing horror. Even their professional detachment couldn't hide their fear at the mention of the Nameless Ones. We need to evacuate the school, one of them insisted. Get everyone as far from here as possible. It wouldn't help, Hawthorne replied. If the barrier falls completely, nowhere on Earth will be safe for long. Our only chance is to help Dumbledore return with the sealing ritual. And you've left this task to 2 students and Esmeralda Addams? McGonagall asked incredulously. Have you lost your mind? Not entirely, Hawthorne replied with a grimness that suggested it remained a possibility. But those 2 students have a unique connection to the castle that none of us possess. And Esmeralda, for all her eccentricities, understands dimensional boundaries better than anyone alive. McGonagall's lips thinned to a nearly invisible line. Filius, Pomona, Severus, she called to the other heads of houses who had gathered nearby. With me. Archimedes says we'll be needed for the ritual when, Albus returns. As they prepared to descend to the heart chamber, a strange darkness began to gather at the edges of the entrance hall, not ordinary shadows, but something deeper, more viscous, that seemed to absorb the light around it. It's starting, Crane whispered, her professional demeanor cracking. The barrier is beginning to fail. Then we have no time to waste, McGonagall declared, straightening her spine. Prefects, gather your houses in the Great Hall. All students are to remain together regardless of what they see or hear. As the staff mobilized, Felix's younger sister Ophelia caught Hawthorne's sleeve. My brother's down there, isn't he? With the Thornfield girl. Yes, Hawthorne admitted, seeing no point in lying. They're trying to help. The young Slytherin's face hardened with determination so like her brother's. Then I'm coming too. Blackwood stick together. Absolutely not, McGonagall began. Actually, Hawthorne interrupted, a realization dawning, we might need her. Esmeralda mentioned needing a blood connection to the Founders for the traditional renewal. The Blackwoods don't have Founders' blood, McGonagall objected. Not directly, Ophelia confirmed, but we have a connection through marriage to the Gaunt line, which traces back to Slytherin. It's distant, but it might be enough. Hawthorne and McGonagall exchanged looks. Even a tenuous blood connection might help stabilize the ritual. Very well, McGonagall agreed reluctantly. But you stay behind us at all times and follow instructions exactly. As they prepared to descend, Unspeakable Crane approached with a silver device. Take this. If you succeed in bringing Dumbledore back, activate it immediately. It will help stabilize the dimensional distortions around him. McGonagall accepted the device, hoping desperately they would have the chance to use it. In the Heart Chamber, preparations for the awakening ritual were underway. Grandmama had inscribed a complex pattern of symbols around the crystal heart, using what appeared to be a mixture of crushed herbs and her own blood. Nothing like a little family fluid to strengthen dimensional magic, she explained cheerfully as she worked. The Addams bloodline has certain, useful properties when it comes to crossing boundaries. Liz and Felix stood inside the central circle, watching in fascinated horror as Grandmama completed the final symbols. Are you sure this will work? Felix asked, unable to hide his nervousness. Sure. Of course not. Grandmama cackled. That's what makes it exciting. We're attempting something that's only been done twice before in magical history, and both previous attempts ended with the participants' minds scattered across 17 dimensions. That's not reassuring, Liz muttered. It wasn't meant to be, dear. Grandmama straightened, admiring her handiwork. Reassurance breeds complacency. Fear, on the other hand, sharpens the mind wonderfully. The crystal heart pulsed faster as the symbols around it began to glow with their own inner light. Through their connection, Liz could feel the castle's anticipation, and its fear. Despite its power, it was afraid of what was trying to break through. Once we begin, Grandmama instructed, suddenly serious, you must keep your minds focused on a single purpose, creating a bridge for Dumbledore to cross. The heart will try to show you many things, past, present, future, possibilities, other realities. Ignore them. Find Albus in the dimensional void and guide him home. And if we get lost in there? Felix asked quietly. Grandmama's ancient face softened slightly. Then I'll come in after you, child. The Addams family never abandons a worthy apprentice. The unexpected reassurance actually helped. Liz reached for Felix's hand, finding it already extended toward her. Their fingers interlaced, both drawing strength from the contact. Ready? Grandmama asked, taking position at the edge of the circle. They nodded in unison. Then let us begin. Grandmama raised her arms and began chanting in a language Liz didn't recognize, something ancient and guttural that seemed to resonate with the very stones around them. The symbols on the floor flared brighter, and the crystal heart's pulsing intensified, sending waves of energy rippling through the chamber. Liz felt the castle's consciousness pressing more insistently against her mind, no longer a background presence but an overwhelming force seeking entry. Beside her, Felix gasped, obviously feeling the same pressure. Don't fight it, Grandmama called over the building magical roar. Let it in. Become the bridge. Taking a deep breath, Liz relaxed her mental barriers, allowing the castle's awareness to flow into her consciousness. The sensation was overwhelming, centuries of memories, emotions, and perceptions flooding her mind all at once. The castle had seen so much, felt so much, remembered everything that had ever happened within its walls. Dimly, she was aware of Felix's hand tightening on hers, anchoring her as they both surrendered to the merging. Their individual consciousnesses began to blur, flowing together through their shared connection to the heart. Liz could feel Felix's thoughts, his memories, his essence mingling with hers and with the vast awareness of Hogwarts itself. Together, they expanded beyond their physical bodies, extending through the crystal heart and into the dimensional boundaries it maintained. Here, reality itself became fluid, malleable, a swirling chaos of possibilities and potentials. Find Dumbledore, Liz thought/felt, the intention reverberating through their merged consciousness. Create the bridge. They reached out, searching through the chaotic dimensional void for a familiar magical signature. Time had no meaning here, they could have been searching for seconds or centuries. Finally, they felt it, a flicker of powerful, familiar magic struggling against encroaching shadows. There. Felix's thought was indistinguishable from her own as they focused their merged awareness on that distant point. Dumbledore was indeed trapped, caught between realities as he attempted to complete the ritual that would seal the barrier permanently. Around him, shadow beings with forms that hurt to perceive circled like predators, preventing his return. We need to clear a path, Liz thought/felt. The castle responded, channeling its ancient power through their merged consciousness, creating a beam of pure magical energy that speared toward Dumbledore's position. The shadows recoiled from the light, shrieking in voices that existed beyond normal hearing. Now. They called together, extending their merged awareness like a lifeline. Dumbledore sensed them immediately, his consciousness touching theirs with surprise and then understanding. He grasped the connection they offered and began pulling himself along it, fighting against the shadows that tried to hold him back. It's working. Felix's excitement pulsed through their merged mind. But the shadows weren't giving up. As Dumbledore moved closer to their reality, the Nameless Ones grew more desperate, their attacks more vicious. Liz felt their alien consciousnesses brush against the edges of their merged mind, ancient, hungry, utterly inhuman. They're following him, she realized with horror. We're creating a path for them too. The castle sensed the danger and responded, narrowing the connection, focusing it more precisely on Dumbledore alone. But the effort strained their merged consciousness to its limits. Liz could feel their connection beginning to fray at the edges, their individual minds threatening to snap back to their bodies, or worse, to scatter across the dimensional void. Hold on, she urged, pouring every ounce of will into maintaining the bridge. We're almost there. Dumbledore was close now, his consciousness a bright beacon moving steadily along their connection. Behind him, the shadows pressed forward, reaching with appendages that defied physical laws. Just as it seemed their connection would snap, new power flowed into their merged consciousness, structured, disciplined magic forming a supporting framework around their wildly extended awareness. McGonagall, Flitwick, Sprout, and Snape had arrived, adding their magic to the ritual. Liz felt their distinct magical signatures reinforcing the bridge she and Felix had created. And with them came another presence, younger, less powerful, but with a familiar feel that reminded her of Felix. Ophelia, Felix's recognition pulsed through their connection. My sister. The addition of a blood connection, however distant, to one of the founders strengthened the ritual dramatically. The bridge solidified, and with a final surge of will, Dumbledore crossed the threshold between dimensions, his consciousness snapping back into his physical form on their side of the barrier. Break the connection. Grandmama's voice cut through their merged awareness. Now. With tremendous effort, Liz began pulling back, separating her consciousness from the castle and from Felix. It felt like tearing apart something that had become fundamentally joined, but she forced herself to withdraw, to remember her individual identity. Slowly, painfully, she became aware of her physical body again, kneeling on the chamber floor, hands still clasped with Felix's, both of them trembling violently. Before them stood Albus Dumbledore, looking exhausted but very much present, his blue eyes sharp with purpose. "Well done," he said softly. "Extraordinarily well done." Behind him, the heads of houses maintained a protective circle, wands raised, while Grandmama continued her chant, the symbols on the floor now blazing with almost unbearable brightness. "We haven't much time," Dumbledore continued, producing a small crystal vial filled with what looked like liquid starlight. "The nameless ones are right behind me." As if to confirm his words, the air in the chamber rippled, dark fissures appearing around them like cracks in reality itself. Through these cracks, Liz caught glimpses of writhing shadows and a darkness so complete it seemed to consume light. "The sealing ritual," Hawthorne urged. "Quickly, Albus." Dumbledore nodded, moving to the crystal heart with surprising grace for someone who had just traversed dimensions. "Minerva, the stabilizer." McGonagall handed him the silver device Crane had provided. Dumbledore examined it briefly, nodded in approval, and attached it to the base of the crystal heart, where it melded seamlessly with the structure. "This will temporarily strengthen the existing barrier," he explained, giving us time to implement the permanent solution. The device activated with a pulse of silver light that spread through the chamber, sealing the dimensional cracks that had begun to form. Liz felt the pressure ease slightly, though the sense of imminent danger remained. "Now," Dumbledore continued, turning to Liz and Felix, who were still recovering from their dimensional merging, "I must ask one final service of you both. The sealing ritual requires the willing participation of the castle itself." "It's listening," Liz confirmed, feeling the castle's attention focused intently on Dumbledore. "It wants to help." "Excellent." Dumbledore held up the vial of liquid starlight. "This is distilled essence of a dying star, collected from a dimension where such things can be harvested. When introduced to the heart crystal, it will create a permanent dimensional seal, but only if the heart itself accepts and integrates it willingly." "And you need us to, what? Convince it?" Felix asked, his voice hoarse. "Precisely," Dumbledore's eyes twinkled despite the grave situation. "Your connection with the heart is unique, forged through crisis and choice rather than position or power. It trusts you in a way it might not trust me." Liz and Felix exchanged glances, still dizzy from their previous merging but understanding the necessity. "We don't need to fully merge again, do we?" Liz asked warily. "Because that was intense," Felix finished. "No, a simple connection will suffice," Dumbledore assured them. "Just enough to convey intent and receive consent." They moved closer to the crystal heart again, placing their hands against its surface. The connection formed immediately, easier than before. The castle recognized them, welcomed them. "We have a way to permanently seal the barrier," Liz explained through their connection. "To keep the nameless ones out forever." The castle's consciousness responded with curious probing, asking without words what this would mean for its newfound awareness. "It won't send you back to sleep," Felix assured it. "You'll remain awake, alive, but the dimensional boundaries will be strengthened." They felt the castle considering, weighing the options. Its primary purpose had always been protection, of its students, of the magical world, of reality itself. Finally, they felt its agreement flow through the connection, a willing acceptance of its role as eternal guardian. "It consents," Liz announced, opening her eyes. Dumbledore nodded gravely. "Then let us begin." The heads of houses positioned themselves at cardinal points around the heart, wands raised. Grandmama and Hawthorne took positions between them, completing the circle. Dumbledore stood directly before the crystal, the vial of starlight raised. The words of Morgana, spoken in trust and need, he intoned, his voice carrying surprising power for a man who looked so weary. "By light of dying star and will of living stone, let the veil between worlds be strengthened." He uncorked the vial and poured the liquid starlight directly onto the crystal heart. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shimmering substance began to sink into the crystal, spreading through its structure like glowing veins. The heart pulsed once, twice, then began to glow with increasing intensity. The light it emitted changed, becoming deeper, richer, more complex, like seeing new colors for the first time. Heads of houses, channel your magic. Dumbledore commanded. McGonagall, Flitwick, Sprout, and Snape cast in unison, streams of precisely controlled magic flowing from their wands into the crystal heart, guiding and shaping the integration of the starlight essence. Esmeralda, Archimedes, the dimensional anchors. Grandmama and Hawthorne raised their hands, Grandmama disdaining a wand as always, adding their own unique magical signatures to the ritual, Grandmama's wild, ancient power complementing Hawthorne's structured, disciplined magic. And now, Dumbledore turned to Ophelia, who stood nervously at the edge of the circle, the blood connection. The young Slytherin stepped forward, chin raised with determination. Dumbledore gestured for her to place her hand on one facet of the crystal heart. As she did, the crystal pulsed, recognizing the distant echo of Founder's blood. "It only needs a drop," Dumbledore said gently. Ophelia nodded, producing a small silver knife from her robes. Apparently Blackwood's came prepared for blood magic, and made a tiny cut on her palm. As a single drop of blood fell onto the crystal surface, it flashed with emerald light that rapidly spread through the structure, reinforcing the patterns created by the starlight essence. "The connection is established," Dumbledore announced. "Now, Miss Thornfield, Mr. Blackwood, guide the castle through the final integration." Once more, Liz and Felix placed their hands on the crystal heart, opening themselves to its consciousness. This time, instead of merging completely, they maintained their individual identities while establishing a clear channel for communication. The castle was struggling to integrate the starlight essence. The power was enormous, almost overwhelming even for its ancient awareness. Together, Liz and Felix helped it navigate the process, showing it how to absorb and distribute the energy throughout its structure. As they worked, Liz became aware of something else happening. The dimensional barrier wasn't just being sealed but transformed. The starlight essence was creating something new, a boundary that wasn't rigid and impenetrable but alive and adaptive, capable of identifying and repelling threats while still allowing the natural flow of magical energy. The castle's consciousness expanded with this new understanding, embracing its role not as a wall but as a guardian, a sentinel watching over the boundaries between worlds. Finally, with a pulse of completion that resonated through every stone of Hogwarts, the integration finished. The crystal heart settled into a new rhythm, deeper, stronger, more confident. The light it emitted stabilized into a rich, multi-layered glow that somehow felt both ancient and new. "It is done," Dumbledore said softly, lowering his hands. "The sealing is complete." As the ritual participants lowered their wands and caught their breath, Liz and Felix gently withdrew from their connection with the heart. This time, the separation was easier, more natural, like saying goodbye to a friend you knew you'd see again soon. "Did it work?" McGonagall asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. As if in answer, the chamber shuddered once, and they all felt it, a wave of power radiating outward from the heart, spreading throughout the castle and beyond. Where it passed, the lingering dimensional distortions vanished, reality settling back into its proper alignment. "Yes, Minerva," Dumbledore confirmed, a tired smile crossing his face. "It worked. The barrier is sealed, more effectively than ever before. The Nameless Ones will not break through. Not in our lifetime, anyway," Grandmama added cheerfully. "Maybe in a few thousand years they'll figure out a new approach, but that's a problem for future generations." Despite the gravity of what they'd just accomplished, Liz couldn't help laughing, partly from relief, partly from the sheer absurdity of Grandmama's eternal optimism about potential apocalypses. Felix joined her, his usual composure cracking as the tension of the past hours released. Soon they were all laughing, even Snape managing a thin smile, as the reality of their success sank in. "I believe," Dumbledore said when they had collected themselves, "that a celebration is in order. Shall we return to the Great Hall and share the good news?" As they prepared to leave the chamber, Liz turned for one last look at the crystal heart. It pulsed once, directly to her, a feeling of gratitude and connection that needed no words. "You're welcome," she whispered. "See you around." Word spread quickly throughout Hogwarts. Dumbledore had returned. The strange shadows and temporal anomalies had been banished. The castle was saved. Of course, the full truth was known only to those who had been in the Heart Chamber, but that didn't stop rumors from flying as students gathered in the Great Hall for what had spontaneously become a celebration feast. I heard Dumbledore fought off 100 Dementors with his bare hands, an excited second year was telling anyone who would listen. Don't be stupid, his friend countered. It was obviously time-traveling Death Eaters trying to change the past. At the Ravenclaw table, Liz sat with Maya and the Thornhill twins, picking at her food despite her physical exhaustion. The dimensional merging had left her ravenous, but also strangely disconnected from ordinary concerns like eating. So you're really not going to tell us what happened down there? Finn asked for the third time. McGonagall asked us to keep the details private, Liz replied, the practiced response coming easily now. For security reasons. But you and Blackwood were right in the middle of it, Rowan pressed. Everyone's saying you helped Dumbledore seal some kind of magical rift. Everyone's saying a lot of things, Liz deflected, glancing across the hall to where Felix sat at the Slytherin table, his sister Ophelia close beside him, both looking as exhausted as she felt. He caught her eye, and that faint awareness flickered between them, an echo of their deeper connection during the ritual. They'd seen each other's minds, memories, fears, and hopes. There was no going back from that kind of intimacy. Oh Merlin, you're doing it again, Maya groaned, following her gaze. The meaningful eye contact thing. It's gotten even worse since whatever happened down there. Liz felt her cheeks warm. It's not like that. It's exactly like that, Finn countered. The whole school's talking about how you two disappeared together and came back with some kind of magical bond. We don't have a, Liz began, then stopped, because denying it completely would be a lie. They did have a bond, just not the romantic one everyone assumed. Though after sharing minds so completely, the line between types of intimacy had become rather blurred. She was saved from further explanation by Dumbledore rising from his seat at the center of the high table. The hall fell instantly silent, all eyes turning to the returned headmaster. My dear students and colleagues, he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. I must first apologize for my unexpected absence. Urgent magical research required my personal attention, and I am grateful to Madame Addams for stepping in during this time. Grandmama, still in her batwing dress but now sporting what appeared to be a necklace made of miniature skulls, cackled cheerfully from her seat beside him. As you have no doubt noticed, Hogwarts has undergone some changes during my absence. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled merrily. Some of these changes will be permanent. The castle has awakened to its full potential, and while certain, extreme manifestations will be moderated, Hogwarts will remain a more magical, more responsive home for magical education than ever before. A murmur of excitement ran through the students. Many had grown fond of the castle's new personality, even with its occasional attempts to eat them. Madame Addams has kindly agreed to remain with us for the remainder of the term as a special instructor in advanced magical practices, Dumbledore continued, to gasps of surprise from students and visible horror from several staff members. Her unique perspective on magic will be an invaluable resource for those interested in exploring beyond standard curriculum. Grandmama waved cheerfully at the stunned students, her ancient face splitting into that now familiar terrifying grin. Additionally, I would like to extend special recognition to several students who demonstrated exceptional courage and magical ability during recent events. Liz sank lower in her seat as Dumbledore called out several names, including hers and Felix's, asking them to stand. Reluctantly, she rose, feeling hundreds of eyes turned toward her. Without the quick thinking and remarkable magical connection of Miss Thornfield and Mr. Blackwood, recent magical anomalies might have had far more serious consequences, Dumbledore explained, somehow making dimensional invasion by ancient shadow entities sound like a minor inconvenience. They, along with Miss Blackwood, have earned special awards for services to the school, and 200 points each to their respective houses. The hall erupted in cheers, particularly from Ravenclaw and Slytherin, who now found themselves neck and neck for the House Cup. Liz caught Felix's eye across the hall again, sharing a moment of mutual embarrassment at the attention. And now, Dumbledore concluded, let us enjoy this excellent feast, secure in the knowledge that Hogwarts stands stronger than ever before, ready to nurture the next generation of witches and wizards in all the wonders magic has to offer. As conversations resumed and the celebration continued, Liz slipped away from the table, needing a moment of quiet to process everything. The entrance hall was peaceful, the enchanted ceiling showing a perfect night sky filled with stars. She wasn't surprised when Felix joined her a few minutes later, leaning against the same column. So, he said after a comfortable silence. Special award for services to the school. Better than detention for dimensional tampering, she replied. He laughed softly. True. Though I'm not sure how I'll explain to my father that we helped implement Addams' family magic on a castle-wide scale. Better than explaining to my mother that I've been learning the magic she deliberately turned away from, Liz countered. She's going to have opinions. Another silence fell, but it wasn't awkward. After sharing minds, words seemed almost redundant. It's still there, Felix said finally. The connection. Fainter, but... I know. Liz could still feel it, that gentle awareness of both him and the castle, a background hum in her consciousness. McGonagall thinks it might fade completely over time. Do you want it to? The question caught her off guard with its directness. I don't know. It's strange having someone else in my head, even a little bit. But also not entirely terrible, he finished for her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Not entirely, she agreed, returning the smile. The castle around them seemed to pulse gently, as if approving of their conversation. The stones beneath their feet warmed slightly, and the starlight from the enchanted ceiling focused into a pattern that looked suspiciously like a heart. Now you're just showing off, Liz muttered to the ceiling, which twinkled innocently in response. Felix laughed, the sound echoing through the entrance hall. I think it's playing matchmaker. Great. A sentient magical castle with romantic notions. But she was laughing too, the absurdity of everything that had happened finally hitting her fully. Could be worse, Felix suggested, moving a step closer. It could be sending animated suits of armor to serenade us. As if on cue, a distant clanking began at the top of the grand staircase. You had to say it, Liz groaned. Sir Clankington, the lead armor from the earlier Union dispute, appeared at the top of the stairs, holding what appeared to be a magical lute. Behind him, 3 more suits of armor carried various instruments. The castle requests a romantic ballad for the heroes, Sir Clankington announced in his tinny voice. Absolutely not, Liz called back, mortified. The armor tilted its helmet in what might have been disappointment. The castle is most insistent. It has been planning this since you stabilized its heart. Felix stepped forward. Perhaps a compromise? A heroic march instead of a romantic ballad? The armor considered this, helmet tilting the other way. Acceptable. Though the castle wishes me to inform you that it will continue its matchmaking efforts regardless. As the animated armor began a surprisingly decent rendition of a triumphant march, Felix turned back to Liz with a rueful smile. I think we're fighting a losing battle against architectural interference in our personal lives, he observed. Probably, she agreed. Then, gathering her courage, she added, though maybe it's not entirely wrong about certain things. Felix's eyes widened slightly, but before he could respond, the doors to the great hall burst open and students began spilling into the entrance hall, drawn by the impromptu concert. There you are. Maya exclaimed, grabbing Liz's arm. Grandmama's about to demonstrate something called recreational reanimation, and McGonagall looks like she's about to have an aneurysm. You can't miss this. As she was pulled back toward the great hall, Liz glanced over her shoulder at Felix, who shrugged with exaggerated helplessness before being similarly accosted by his Slytherin friends. The conversation would have to wait. But with the castle's permanent awakening, Grandmama's continued presence, and their own lingering connection, Liz suspected they would have plenty of time to explore whatever was developing between them, magical and otherwise. Above all, Hogwarts had been forever changed. No longer just a school of witchcraft and wizardry, but a living, conscious entity partnering with its inhabitants to explore the full potential of magic beyond ministry regulations and traditional limitations. And as Liz allowed herself to be dragged back into the celebration, she couldn't help thinking that Grandmama Addams, eccentric, terrifying, brilliant Grandmama, had given them all a gift far more valuable than conventional magical education. She had awakened Hogwarts to its true nature. And in doing so, had awakened them all to the wild, wonderful possibilities of magic unbound by fear or tradition. Whatever adventures came next, Liz knew one thing for certain: nothing at Hogwarts would ever be the same again. And that, perhaps, was Grandmama's greatest lesson of all. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.